But before he could complete the spell, something extraordinary happened. Daphne Greengrass stepped between them. The blonde Slytherin girl moved with the kind of precise grace that characterized purebloods raised in formal social environments, but her expression carried a determination that Harry had never seen from her before. "That's enough, Marcus," she said, her voice cool but carrying unmistakable authority. "You don't speak for Slytherin House, and you certainly don't speak for me." Flint stared at her, as if she had announced her intention to become a professional Quidditch player for the Chudley Cannons. "Daphne, what are you doing? This is about house loyalty, about defending our heritage from— This is about you using our house's name to justify ignorance and prejudice," Daphne interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "And I won't stand for it." She turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers, her voice carrying clearly throughout the great hall. "I've seen Salazar Slytherin's journal. I've read his actual words, not the distorted versions that have been used to justify centuries of hatred and division. And I can tell you that our founder would be ashamed of students who use his name to attack their classmates rather than learn from them." The effect of her words was immediate and dramatic. Several other Slytherin students stepped forward to stand beside her, while others began arguing among themselves about loyalty, truth, and what their house really represented. "You're betraying everything we stand for," Pansy Parkinson said, her voice shrill with outrage. "I'm standing for what we actually stand for," Daphne replied firmly. "Ambition, cunning, resourcefulness, determination. Not ignorance, prejudice, and mindless adherence to distorted history." What happened next would be debated in dormitories and common rooms for years to come. Multiple witnesses would provide conflicting accounts of who cast the first spell, who escalated from words to magic, who turned a heated argument into an open battle. But everyone agreed on two facts. It began when Marcus Flint pointed his wand at Hermione and shouted, "Mudblood Hex!" And it escalated dramatically when Harry's disarming charm sent Flint's wand flying across the great hall to embed itself in the wall near the head table. Then chaos erupted. Students throughout the hall drew their wands and began choosing sides with the kind of speed that suggested this confrontation had been building for weeks. Hexes flew through the air like angry hornets. Defensive shields sprang up around groups of allies, and the carefully maintained peace of Hogwarts dissolved into open magical combat. Harry found himself at the center of a swirling melee that seemed to involve half the school. He deflected a stinging hex from a sixth-year Ravenclaw, who apparently opposed inter-house cooperation, helped Neville shield a group of first-years who had been caught in the crossfire, and watched in amazement as Luna Lovegood calmly stunned two older students who had been trying to hex Susan Bones from behind. But it was Hermione who truly distinguished herself in the battle that followed. Moving with the kind of strategic thinking that characterized her approach to everything from academic research to magical combat, she coordinated the defense of students who supported integration while simultaneously organizing counterattacks against those who had initiated violence. "Cho, take Anthony and Terry and protect the younger students near the Ravenclaw table," she called out, her voice somehow carrying clearly despite the chaos surrounding them. "Susan, get the Hufflepuffs organized for shield work. We need to contain the hexes before someone gets seriously hurt." Harry watched her direct their allies with a combination of Gryffindor courage and Slytherin cunning that proved the Sorting Hat had placed her in exactly the right house. She didn't just react to threats, she anticipated them, countered them, and turned them into opportunities for demonstrating the superiority of collaborative strategy over individual conflict. When a group of seventh-year students began casting particularly dangerous hexes that threatened to cause permanent injury, Hermione organized a coordinated response that combined defensive magic from all four houses into a barrier that not only stopped the attack, but reflected it back in a way that left the aggressors tangled in their own binding spells. "That was brilliant," Harry said, as they paused behind an overturned table that Seamus Finnegan had transfigured into a makeshift shield. "That was Slytherin strategy applied to Gryffindor principles," Hermione replied, deflecting another hex with casual competence. Exactly what the founders intended when they designed integrated learning. The battle might have continued indefinitely, or at least until someone suffered serious injury, except for the intervention of authority figures who were forced to work together, despite their own philosophical differences. Professor McGonagall appeared at one end of the Great Hall with her wand drawn and her expression thunderous, clearly prepared to discipline every student involved, regardless of their house affiliation or political positions. At the same time, Professor Snape emerged from the other direction, his black robes billowing dramatically as he began casting powerful containment spells that wrapped around the most aggressive combatants. What happened next was perhaps the most remarkable thing Harry had witnessed in his time at Hogwarts. McGonagall and Snape, who had spent years maintaining a relationship of barely professional courtesy, coordinated their magical efforts with the kind of seamless cooperation that suggested extensive practice working together. McGonagall's transfiguration expertise created barriers and safe zones that protected non-combatants while giving Snape clear lines of approach to the most dangerous fighters. Snape's potions mastery allowed him to cast precise spells that subdued aggressive students without causing permanent harm, while McGonagall organized the evacuation of anyone who had been injured. "Finite incantatem!" McGonagall called out, her voice magically amplified to carry throughout the hall. "All combatants will cease hostilities immediately." The authority in her voice, combined with the visible cooperation between Gryffindor and Slytherin heads of house, had an immediate effect. Students throughout the hall began lowering their wands and stepping away from active confrontation, though the tension and anger remained palpable. "Anyone requiring medical attention will report to Madame Pomfrey immediately," Snape announced, his black eyes scanning the assembled students for signs of serious injury. "Anyone who continues to brandish a wand will find themselves in detention until the end of term." As the immediate crisis subsided and students began sorting themselves into groups for medical evaluation and disciplinary processing, Harry realized that something fundamental had changed during the battle. The conflict was no longer hidden or subtle. The divisions within the student body were now visible to everyone, and the stakes had escalated far beyond house rivalry or personal friendship. This was war. Not the kind of war fought with killing curses and dark magic, but the kind of war fought for the soul of their community and the principles that would guide their generation's approach to magic, society, and each other. And as Harry looked around at the faces of students who had chosen to fight beside him, Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws and even some Slytherins, he realized that they had something their opponents lacked. They had unity. They had cooperation. They had the kind of collaborative strength that their enemies were desperately trying to prevent them from discovering. The battle in the Great Hall had been intended to divide them, to force them apart, to prove that integration was impossible and dangerous. Instead, it had proven exactly the opposite. As McGonagall and Snape began organizing the complex process of sorting out disciplinary consequences for nearly 100 students who had participated in magical combat, Harry caught Hermione's eye across the disrupted hall. She smiled at him, tired, determined, absolutely unrepentant, and Harry knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. All of them, from all houses, united by something stronger than tradition, more powerful than prejudice, more lasting than the fear that drove their opponents to such desperate measures. The Founder's vision was coming true, one friendship at a time, one act of courage at a time, one moment of choosing cooperation over competition at a time, and no amount of political pressure, bureaucratic manipulation, or open magical combat was going to stop it. As the last echoes of the battle faded, and the Great Hall began the long process of returning to normalcy, Harry realized that they had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. The resistance had become a revolution, and the revolution was just beginning. Chapter 8. The Founder's Truth. The hidden chamber beneath the Great Hall had remained sealed for over 700 years, waiting for students brave enough to prove that the Founder's vision of unity could triumph over centuries of manufactured division. As Harry stood before the ancient stone door with representatives from all 4 houses beside him, he felt the weight of history pressing down like a physical force. The door itself was a masterwork of collaborative magic, carved with intertwining symbols that represented each house's contribution to Hogwarts' educational mission. The Gryffindor lion stood beside the Ravenclaw eagle, while the Hufflepuff badger was positioned next to the Slytherin serpent, not as opponents, but as partners in a shared endeavor. "Remember," the Bloody Baron had instructed them, before fading away to avoid detection by the professors who would inevitably investigate their unauthorized nighttime expedition. "The wards will only respond to genuine cooperation between all 4 houses. Any hint of competition, suspicion, or artificial collaboration will keep the chamber sealed forever." Harry looked around at the small group they had carefully selected for this moment. From Gryffindor, besides himself, stood Neville Longbottom, whose quiet courage had proven itself repeatedly over the past weeks. Luna Lovegood represented Ravenclaw, her serene confidence a balancing force against the tension they all felt. Susan Bones had volunteered for Hufflepuff, bringing her practical wisdom and unshakable moral clarity. And from Slytherin came the biggest surprise: Draco Malfoy. His presence had been Hermione's suggestion, born from her recognition that breaking open the Founder's Chamber would require not just representatives from each house, but individuals who embodied the best qualities their houses could offer. Draco's participation represented a repudiation of everything his family stood for, a choice of principle over blood loyalty that had cost him more than Harry could fully comprehend. "Are we ready?" Hermione asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Harry looked around the circle, seeing determination mixed with nervous excitement on every face. They had spent hours practicing the collaborative spell work required to breach the chamber's wards, learning to synchronize their magical efforts in ways that required absolute trust and coordination. "Together," he said simply. They raised their wands in unison, each focusing on the specific aspect of the unlocking spell that drew upon their house's particular strengths. Harry channeled Gryffindor courage into his magic, feeling the warm rush of determination that had sustained him through every challenge he had faced at Hogwarts. Beside him, Luna's Ravenclaw wisdom flowed like cool water, while Susan's Hufflepuff loyalty blazed with steady warmth. And from Draco came something Harry had never expected to sense from a Malfoy: genuine Slytherin ambition directed toward justice rather than personal gain. The realization that Draco's cunning and resourcefulness were being applied to overturning the very system that had privileged his family was both humbling and inspiring. The magic that emerged from their combined efforts was unlike anything Harry had ever experienced. Instead of feeling like individual spells working in parallel, it felt like a single, unified force that was greater than the sum of its parts. The sensation was warm and bright, and completely right, in a way that made Harry understand, for the first time, what magical cooperation was supposed to feel like. The ancient door responded to their collaborative magic with a deep, resonant chime that seemed to come from the stones themselves. Wards that had protected the chamber for centuries flickered and faded, recognizing the unity they had been designed to detect. The door swung open silently, revealing a chamber that took Harry's breath away. The space beyond was circular, dominated by 4 desks arranged around a central area that contained what appeared to be a scale model of Hogwarts Castle. But this was Hogwarts, as Harry had never seen it. The model showed dormitories with mixed house occupancy, common rooms that served all students, and classrooms configured for collaborative learning rather than house-based instruction. Each desk bore the symbol of one of the houses, but instead of being separated or isolated, they were positioned so that anyone working at one could easily communicate with the occupants of the others. The entire chamber had been designed as a collaborative workspace where the founders could develop their shared vision for magical education. "Look at this," Luna breathed, approaching what was clearly Rowena Ravenclaw's desk. The workspace was covered with parchments, diagrams, and what appeared to be educational research notes that were centuries ahead of their time. Harry could see detailed analyses of different learning styles, studies of how students from different backgrounds approached magical problems, and proposals for teaching methods that drew upon the strengths of multiple perspectives. "The greatest wisdom," Luna read from one of the parchments, "comes not from any single approach to knowledge, but from the synthesis of different minds working toward common understanding. A student who learns only from those who think as they do will never discover the full scope of what magic can accomplish." At Helga Hufflepuff's desk, Susan had discovered journals filled with observations about student welfare and community building. The entries revealed a founder who was deeply concerned with ensuring that every student felt valued and supported, regardless of their background or natural abilities. "Listen to this," Susan said, her voice filled with wonder. "True loyalty cannot be commanded or demanded. It must be earned through consistent demonstration of care for others' welfare. The house system should create communities of support that help students develop their individual strengths while learning to value the different gifts their peers possess." Harry found himself drawn to Godric Gryffindor's desk, where maps and battle plans shared space with what appeared to be letters to the other founders. The correspondence revealed a man whose understanding of courage had evolved far beyond simple physical bravery. "Courage," Harry read from one of the letters, "is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act rightly despite fear. The greatest courage any student can show is the bravery to stand with friends across any divide, to defend what is right when others choose what is convenient, to believe in unity when the world insists on separation." But it was Hermione who made the most shocking discovery of all. At Salazar Slytherin's desk, she had found a collection of documents that completely revolutionized Harry's understanding of Hogwarts' founding period. These weren't just research notes or educational theories. These were detailed plans for a house system that bore no resemblance to the rigid divisions that characterized modern Hogwarts. "Harry!" Hermione called, her voice tight with excitement and disbelief. "You need to see this. All of you need to see this." They gathered around Slytherin's desk as Hermione spread out a series of parchments that appeared to be the founders' original blueprints for student organization and house assignment. "They never intended the houses to be permanent," Hermione said, her academic excitement barely contained. "Students were supposed to spend 1 year in each house, learning different approaches to magic and developing different aspects of their character." Harry stared at the documents, trying to process what he was seeing. The charts and diagrams showed a rotation system, where first-year students were sorted into houses based on which qualities they most needed to develop, not which they already possessed. A student who was naturally brave but lacked wisdom would start in Ravenclaw, Hermione continued, tracing the flow charts with her finger. Someone who was clever but needed to develop loyalty would begin in Hufflepuff. The goal was to ensure that every graduate had been exposed to all 4 house philosophies and had learned to value courage, wisdom, loyalty, and ambition as complementary rather than competing virtues. "What happened?" Neville asked. "Why did it change?" Hermione consulted another document, this one bearing Salazar Slytherin's personal seal. Political pressure from wealthy families who wanted their children to maintain exclusive social networks. Administrative convenience that made it easier to manage students when they remained in fixed groups. And gradual erosion of the founder's vision as subsequent generations forgot the reasoning behind integration. She picked up what appeared to be Slytherin's final message to future students, dated just before his departure from Hogwarts. "To those who come after," she read aloud, "know that Salazar Slytherin's greatest regret is allowing temporary political concerns to overshadow the permanent educational mission we came together to create. I was wrong to divide what should unite, wrong to prioritize the comfort of tradition over the challenge of growth, wrong to believe that separation could ever serve the cause of magical learning better than collaboration." The message continued with increasing urgency and emotion. "The house system we designed was meant to be a beginning, not an end. a way of helping students discover different aspects of themselves before bringing those aspects together in service of the magical community. If you are reading this, it means that students have rediscovered the courage to question what they have been taught and seek what was always intended. Harry felt something tight in his chest loosening as he listened to Slytherin's words. Here was validation, not just of their friendship across house lines, but of their entire movement toward integration and cooperation. "Do not let anyone tell you that unity is impossible or dangerous," Hermione continued reading. "Do not accept the argument that competition serves education better than collaboration. Do not believe that the divisions we created to help students grow should become permanent barriers that prevent them from achieving their full potential." The final section of Slytherin's message was addressed directly to students who might discover the chamber. "You who have unlocked this chamber through genuine cooperation have already proven that the Founder's vision can be restored. Use what you find here not to destroy what exists, but to transform it into what it was always meant to become. The future of magical education and magical society depends on your courage to choose unity over division, cooperation over competition, friendship over prejudice." The silence that followed Hermione's reading was heavy with the weight of revelation and responsibility. They had found exactly what they needed to validate their entire movement, but the implications were staggering. "We have to share this," Susan said finally. "Everyone needs to know what the Founders actually intended." "Not just share it," Draco said, his voice carrying a determination that Harry had never heard from him before. "We have to implement it. We have to prove that their vision works better than the corrupted system we've inherited." "How?" Luna asked, though her dreamy tone suggested she already had ideas. "A proposal," Hermione said, her strategic mind immediately moving toward practical application. "A formal presentation to the entire school community, with full documentation of what we've discovered, and a detailed plan for gradual transition toward the Founder's original model." Harry felt excitement building as he grasped the scope of what they were contemplating. This wasn't just about defending their friendship anymore. This was about fundamentally transforming Hogwarts education in alignment with its Founder's actual intentions. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow night," Hermione said. "In the Great Hall, public, official, with every student and faculty member present. No more secret meetings or underground resistance. If we're going to restore the Founder's vision, we need to do it in the open." As they carefully gathered copies of the most important documents and prepared to seal the chamber until they could return with proper archival equipment, Harry realized that they had crossed another threshold. Tomorrow night would determine not just the future of their movement, but the future of magical education at Hogwarts. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. The next evening, the Great Hall was packed beyond capacity. Word of a major announcement regarding Hogwarts history and educational policy had spread through the school with the speed that characterized any genuinely important news. Students filled not just the house tables, but every available space, including the aisles and areas near the walls. At the head table, the faculty sat with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to barely concealed apprehension. Dumbledore had initially resisted the idea of allowing students to make formal presentations about institutional policy, but the discovery of the Founder's Chamber had forced his hand. Even he could not justify suppressing historical evidence of this magnitude. Lucius Malfoy was also present, seated beside Dumbledore with the cold authority of someone representing the Board of Governors' interests. His pale eyes surveyed the assembled students with the calculating attention of a predator evaluating potential threats. Harry stood at a podium that had been conjured in the center of the hall, surrounded by easels displaying enlarged reproductions of the documents they had discovered in the Founder's Chamber. Hermione stood beside him with additional evidence, while representatives from all four houses flanked them in a visible demonstration of inter-house cooperation. "Students and faculty of Hogwarts," Harry began, his voice magically amplified to carry clearly throughout the hall. We are here tonight to share discoveries that fundamentally change our understanding of this school's founding principles and educational mission." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd as students leaned forward with obvious interest and anticipation. "For centuries," Harry continued, "we have been taught that the house system exists to separate students into distinct communities based on their dominant character traits. We have been told that Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin were meant to remain separate, to compete rather than cooperate, to value house loyalty above friendship or collaboration." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces watching him with growing attention. "We have been lied to." The simple statement fell into the hall like a thunderclap, provoking gasps, exclamations, and immediate heated conversations throughout the assembled crowd. "Yesterday evening," Hermione said, stepping forward to address the crowd, "a group of students from all 4 houses successfully accessed a chamber beneath the Great Hall that had been sealed since the Founders' era. What we found there proves that everything we have been taught about the house system is a distortion of the Founders' actual intentions." She gestured toward the displayed documents, her voice carrying the authority of someone presenting thoroughly researched academic findings. The Founders never intended the houses to create permanent divisions between students. They designed a rotation system where students would spend time in each house, learning different approaches to magic and developing different aspects of their character before graduating as fully integrated individuals. The reaction from the student body was immediate and intense. Harry could see shock, excitement, anger, and confusion cycling through the faces watching them, as students tried to reconcile this revelation with everything they had believed about their school. Salazar Slytherin himself, Hermione continued, wrote that his greatest regret was allowing temporary political concerns to overshadow the permanent educational mission the Founders had created together. He explicitly stated that he was wrong to divide what should unite. From the Slytherin table came sounds of surprise and disbelief. Several students appeared to be arguing in whispered conversations, while others sat in stunned silence as their understanding of their house founder was completely transformed. "Godric Gryffindor," Harry added, consulting his notes, "defined true courage as the bravery to stand with friends across any divide, to defend what is right when others choose what is convenient, to believe in unity when the world insists on separation." The Gryffindor table erupted in excited conversations as students processed the implications of their founder's actual philosophy. "Rowena Ravenclaw's research," Luna said, stepping forward with her characteristic serenity, "proved that the greatest wisdom comes not from any single approach to knowledge, but from the synthesis of different minds working toward common understanding." And Helga Hufflepuff, Susan added, wrote that true loyalty cannot be commanded or demanded. It must be earned through consistent demonstration of care for others' welfare, regardless of their house affiliation or family background. The cumulative effect of these revelations was visible throughout the hall. Students were turning to friends and classmates from other houses, their expressions reflecting growing understanding of how artificial the barriers between them had always been. "The current house system," Hermione said, her voice growing stronger with conviction, "is not a tradition we should preserve. It's a corruption we should correct." Before anyone could respond to this statement, Lucius Malfoy rose from his seat at the head table. His pale face was tight with anger, and his voice carried the kind of cold authority that had silenced many previous challenges to established order. "These are serious accusations," he said, his words magically amplified to match the students' presentation. "Accusations that attack the very foundations of wizarding education and social structure. I trust you have more than alleged historical documents to support such revolutionary claims." The challenge was clear, and Harry felt the weight of every gaze in the hall focusing on him as he prepared to respond. "We have the Founders' original documents," Harry replied steadily. "We have testimony from ghosts who were present during the founding period. We have architectural evidence from the hidden chamber that shows how the school was originally configured for integrated learning. and we have practical proof that cooperative learning produces superior results to competitive isolation." "Practical proof?" Lucius's voice dripped with skepticism. Hermione stepped forward, producing a thick portfolio of documentation that she had prepared for exactly this challenge. "Academic performance data from our inter-house study groups shows consistent improvement across all subjects and all participants. Collaborative problem-solving exercises demonstrate that mixed house teams outperform single-house teams by an average of 30%. And social integration surveys indicate that students who work across house lines report higher satisfaction, stronger friendships, and greater confidence in their magical abilities." She handed copies of the research to Professors McGonagall and Flitwick, who began examining the data with obvious academic interest. "Furthermore," Hermione continued, "our historical research has revealed that the current house system was deliberately corrupted by political and economic interests that profited from maintaining artificial divisions within wizarding society. This accusation prompted immediate angry reactions from several members of the faculty and visible fury from Lucius Malfoy. "You are suggesting," Lucius said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that respected wizarding families have deliberately undermined educational excellence for personal gain." "I'm stating," Hermione replied without flinching, "that wealthy families pressured Hogwarts administrators to abandon the founders' vision of integrated education in favor of a system that allowed them to maintain exclusive social networks and hereditary privilege." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge to everything the traditional wizarding establishment represented. Harry could see professors exchanging meaningful glances, students whispering urgently to their neighbors, and Lucius Malfoy's pale face growing even more rigid with barely controlled rage. "And what?" Dumbledore asked from his position at the center of the head table. "Do you propose we do with these discoveries?" Harry looked around at his friends and allies, seeing determination mixed with nervous excitement on every face, then turned back to address the assembled school community. "We propose a gradual transition toward the founders' original vision," he said clearly, "beginning with voluntary inter-house dormitory assignments for students who wish to participate, continuing with integrated classes for advanced subjects that benefit from multiple perspectives, and ultimately implementing a modified rotation system that allows students to experience all 4 house philosophies during their time at Hogwarts." The scope of what he was proposing sent another wave of excited conversation through the student body. This wasn't just about defending cross-house friendships. This was about fundamentally restructuring magical education. "The transition would be voluntary," Hermione added. "Students who prefer the current system would be free to remain in traditional house arrangements. But those who want to participate in the founders' original vision of collaborative learning would have that opportunity." "And how?" Professor McGonagall asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Would you measure the success of such an experiment?" "Academic performance," Susan replied immediately. "Student satisfaction surveys, graduate placement in advanced careers, long-term contributions to magical society. Every metric that actually matters for educational success." Harry could see that McGonagall was intrigued, despite her professional caution. As someone who had dedicated her career to magical education, she could not ignore the possibility that their approach might actually improve student outcomes. "I think," said a voice from the Ravenclaw table, "we should vote on it." The suggestion came from Cho Chang, whose practical approach to complex problems had always impressed Harry. Around her, other students were nodding with obvious agreement. "A student referendum," another voice added from the Hufflepuff section. "Let us decide whether we want to participate in this experiment." The idea spread through the hall like wildfire, with students from all houses expressing support for the opportunity to vote on their own educational experience. "Absolutely not," Lucius Malfoy said, his voice cutting through the excited conversations. "Educational policy is not determined by student popularity contests. It is established by qualified administrators and respected authorities who understand the complexities involved." "With respect, sir," Draco Malfoy said, rising from his seat at the Slytherin table. The students are the ones who will live with the consequences of these policies. Perhaps their voices should be heard. The sight of Draco publicly contradicting his father sent a shock through the entire hall. Students stared in amazement, while faculty members exchanged glances of surprise and concern. "Draco," Lucius said, his voice carrying a warning that made several students visibly uncomfortable. "You will sit down and remain silent." "No, father," Draco replied, his voice steady despite the obvious cost of his defiance. "I will not remain silent while you try to suppress evidence and prevent students from making informed choices about their own education." The confrontation between father and son was painful to watch, but it crystallized everything their movement represented. Here was someone choosing principle over family loyalty, truth over comfortable tradition, the future over the past. All students in favor of implementing voluntary inter-house educational programs based on the founder's original vision, Dumbledore announced suddenly, apparently recognizing that the situation had moved beyond administrative control. "Please stand." What happened next would be remembered as one of the most remarkable moments in Hogwarts history. Students throughout the hall began rising from their seats, not just from one or two houses, but from all four tables. Harry watched in amazement as nearly 3/4 of the student body stood up in support of educational integration. From Gryffindor, the response was overwhelming, with students like Neville, Dean, and Seamus leading the way. Ravenclaw was equally supportive, with Luna's serene confidence apparently having influenced many of her housemates. Hufflepuff rose almost as one, their natural inclination toward cooperation making the choice obvious. But it was the response from Slytherin that truly took Harry's breath away. More than half the house stood up, led by Draco Malfoy's continued defiance of his father's authority. Daphne Greengrass rose with quiet dignity, followed by Tracy Davis, and even several students Harry had never expected to support integration. "Unacceptable," Lucius snarled, his composure finally cracking. "This institution has been corrupted by radical elements who seek to destroy everything that has made wizarding education effective. The Board of Governors will not tolerate—" "The Board of Governors," Dumbledore interrupted with gentle authority, "will consider all relevant evidence before making policy decisions, including evidence of student preference and academic outcomes." The old wizard's eyes were twinkling with something that looked remarkably like satisfaction as he surveyed the hall full of students who had chosen cooperation over competition. "Furthermore," Dumbledore continued, "I believe these discoveries warrant a complete review of our educational practices and their alignment with the Founder's documented intentions." Lucius Malfoy's face had gone white with fury, but before he could respond, Professor McGonagall spoke up from her position at the head table. "I move that we establish a committee to evaluate the feasibility of implementing voluntary integration programs," she said formally. "The committee should include faculty representatives, student representatives, and historical experts who can help us understand the Founder's original vision." "Seconded," Professor Flitwick said immediately. "All in favor?" Dumbledore called out. Every faculty member except Snape raised their hands, and even Snape's abstention seemed more thoughtful than oppositional. "Motion carried," Dumbledore announced. "We will establish an integration committee to develop proposals for voluntary inter-house programs based on historical evidence and student interest." As the formal meeting began to break up and students started filing out of the Great Hall, Harry felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that left him almost dizzy. They had done it. They had presented their evidence, made their case, and won overwhelming support from both students and faculty. But as he watched Lucius Malfoy storm out of the hall with an expression of barely controlled rage, Harry realized that their victory had come at a cost. They had made powerful enemies who would not forget this public defeat, and who had resources to retaliate in ways that went far beyond school politics. "That was incredible," Hermione said, appearing beside him, with her eyes shining with triumph and exhaustion. "That was the easy part," Harry replied, watching the last of the students leave the hall. "Now comes the hard work of actually making it happen." "Do you think we can?" Neville asked, joining them with Susan, Luna, and several other supporters. Harry looked around at the faces of students who had stood up for their beliefs, despite pressure from family, tradition, and institutional authority. He thought about the founders' documents they had discovered, the evidence they had presented, the overwhelming vote of student support they had received. "Yes," he said with quiet conviction. "Yes, I think we can." As they left the great hall and walked through corridors that seemed different now, less divided, more connected, filled with possibility rather than artificial barriers, Harry realized that they had achieved something he had never dared hope for when this entire situation began. They hadn't just defended their friendship across house lines. They hadn't just challenged unjust traditions or proven that cooperation was better than competition. They had restored Hogwarts to its original purpose, transformed an entire educational institution, and created a model that could change wizarding society itself. The founders' vision was no longer just a historical curiosity. It was a living reality that would shape the magical education of every student who came after them. And it had all started with the simple decision that some friendships were worth fighting for, regardless of what colors you wore or what house claimed your loyalty. As Harry walked back to Gryffindor Tower with Hermione beside him, and friends from all houses around them, he realized that the battle was far from over. Lucius Malfoy and his allies would regroup and find new ways to attack what they had built. There would be setbacks, challenges, and moments when the easier choice would be to abandon their principles and return to the comfortable divisions of the past. But they had proven something important tonight. They had proven that change was possible, that students could shape their own educational experience, that the future didn't have to be bound by the limitations of the past. The founders' truth had been revealed, and no amount of political pressure or institutional resistance could suppress it now. The revolution was no longer coming. It was here. Chapter 9. Implementation Challenges. The Hogwarts Integration Committee had wasted no time in moving from theory to practice. Within a week of their formal establishment, they had identified a section of the castle's 7th floor that could be converted into experimental integrated dormitories, developed guidelines for the pilot program, and opened applications for students who wished to participate in the founders' original vision of collaborative education. Harry stood in what would soon become the first integrated common room at Hogwarts in over 6 centuries, watching house elves arrange furniture that reflected all 4 house colors without privileging any single tradition. The space felt different than the traditional common rooms, more open, more welcoming, designed for conversation and collaboration rather than insular house loyalty. "It's perfect," Hermione said, appearing beside him with an expression of wonder and satisfaction that made Harry's chest warm with shared achievement. She had been among the first to volunteer for the pilot program, formally requesting transfer from the Slytherin dormitories to the new integrated wing. The request had required approval from both Professor Snape and the Integration Committee, and Harry suspected that Snape's reluctant consent had been motivated more by his desire to remove a source of disruption from his house than by support for educational innovation. "Are you sure about this?" Harry asked, studying her face for any sign of uncertainty or reservation. "Once you move here, there's no going back. The traditional houses will see it as choosing sides." Hermione's smile was radiant, with the kind of confidence that had characterized her best moments at Hogwarts. "I'm not choosing sides, Harry. I'm choosing the future. Besides," she added, with the logical precision that had always defined her approach to complex problems, "someone has to be first. Someone has to prove that integration works not just in theory, but in practice." Around them, other students were moving into the integrated wing with varying degrees of excitement and nervousness. Luna Lovegood drifted through the space with her characteristic serenity, apparently unbothered by the historical significance of what they were doing. Neville Longbottom arranged his belongings with careful precision, his expression reflecting determination mixed with barely concealed anxiety about leaving the familiar comfort of Gryffindor Tower. From Ravenclaw had come Anthony Goldstein and Terry Boot, drawn by the intellectual challenge of collaborative learning. Hufflepuff was represented by Susan Bones, Ernie Macmillan, and Hannah Abbott, whose natural inclination toward cooperation made them ideal pioneers for the program. And from Slytherin, besides Hermione, had come the biggest surprise, Daphne Greengrass and Tracy Davis, whose participation represented genuine courage given their house's political dynamics and family expectations. 23 students, Harry said, watching the last of the volunteers settle into their new quarters. From all 4 houses, all willing to try something that's never been attempted in living memory. 23 pioneers, Hermione corrected. 23 people who decided that the founder's vision was worth the risk of failure. The correction felt important, and Harry found himself thinking about the courage required, not just to challenge tradition, but to participate in building something entirely new. These students weren't just moving dormitories, they were helping to create a model for educational integration that could transform magical learning throughout Britain and beyond. The thought was interrupted by the arrival of Professor McGonagall, whose expression combined official authority with barely concealed curiosity about the experimental program she had helped establish. "Miss Granger," McGonagall said, approaching with the measured steps of someone conducting an important inspection. "How are you finding the new accommodations?" "Excellent, Professor. The collaborative study spaces are particularly well designed for group research projects." McGonagall nodded approvingly, then turned her attention to the common room, where students from different houses were naturally organizing themselves into mixed groups based on shared interests rather than traditional loyalties. "And you, Mr. Potter, how do you view the progress of integration?" Harry considered the question carefully, aware that his answer would likely be reported to the full integration committee and possibly to opponents of the program who were looking for any sign of failure or problems. "I think it's remarkable how quickly students adapt when they're given the opportunity to work together instead of being forced apart," he said honestly. "The artificial barriers that seemed so important in the traditional system disappear almost immediately when people get to know each other as individuals." "Indeed," McGonagall replied, though something in her tone suggested she was withholding judgment until the program had more time to demonstrate its effectiveness. "I trust you will keep me informed of any challenges that arise." The careful way she phrased the warning made Harry realize that McGonagall was expecting problems. Not academic or social difficulties, but active sabotage from forces opposed to educational integration. Her concerns proved prophetic within 24 hours. Harry was awakened at 3 a.m. by urgent knocking on his dormitory door, followed by Neville's voice calling his name with obvious distress. He grabbed his wand and rushed to the common room, where he found several integration program participants gathered around what appeared to be the remains of someone's personal belongings. "What happened?" Harry asked, taking in the scene of scattered books, torn robes, and what looked like the aftermath of several different hexes. "Someone broke into Daphne's room," Tracy Davis said, her voice tight with anger and fear. "Destroyed her belongings, left threatening messages, cast hexes on her bed that would have seriously injured anyone who tried to sleep there." Harry felt cold fury building in his chest as he examined the damage. This wasn't random vandalism or student pranks. This was systematic intimidation designed to terrorize participants in the integration program. "Was anyone hurt?" he asked. "No," Daphne replied, though her pale face and shaking hands suggested she was more affected than she wanted to admit. "I was in the common room studying. If I had been asleep—" She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone present could imagine the consequences if someone had triggered the hexes while occupying the target's bed. "Who else has been affected?" Hermione asked, appearing with her usual efficiency, despite having been roused from sleep. "My room," Anthony Goldstein said quietly. "Books transfigured into snakes, ink bottles filled with what I think was bubotuber pus, ward stones that would have prevented me from leaving if I'd activated them accidentally." Mine too, Susan Bones added. Someone broke my trunk's locking charm and scattered my belongings, but they also left something behind. A note saying that blood traitors would face escalating consequences for their betrayal of wizarding tradition. Harry felt his anger shifting from cold fury to strategic calculation. This wasn't just harassment. This was a coordinated campaign designed to drive students out of the integration program through fear and intimidation. "We need to report this to the professors," Hermione said immediately. "We need to do more than that," Harry replied, his mind already moving toward solutions. "We need to protect ourselves and make sure this doesn't happen again." Over the next several hours, Harry found himself organizing the kind of security operation he had never imagined needing within Hogwarts walls. Using knowledge gained from his years with the Marauders map and his experience facing various magical threats, he coordinated a systematic approach to protecting integration program participants. "Buddy system," he explained to the assembled group in the common room later that morning. "Nobody goes anywhere alone, especially after dark. We set up rotating patrols of the integrated wing, and everyone learns the basic defensive spells we covered in our study sessions." "What about the professors?" Neville asked. "Won't they handle security?" Harry exchanged glances with Hermione, seeing his own skepticism reflected in her expression. "The professors will investigate and impose official discipline on anyone they can identify," Harry said carefully. "But the people doing this are being careful not to get caught by official channels. They're using the same kinds of anonymous tactics that characterize the attacks on our study sessions." "You think it's the same people?" Luna asked with her characteristic directness. "I think it's people working for the same interests," Hermione replied. "The families and political groups that benefit from maintaining division and prejudice in wizarding society. They've moved from trying to stop our movement to trying to destroy it through intimidation." The analysis felt accurate and deeply troubling. They were no longer facing institutional resistance or bureaucratic obstacles. They were facing people who were willing to use dangerous magic against students to prevent educational reform. "So what do we do?" Daphne asked, her voice steady, despite the fear that still lingered in her expression. "We prove that cooperation is stronger than intimidation," Harry said with quiet determination. "We protect each other, support each other, and refuse to be driven apart by people who profit from our division." The security measures Harry implemented proved both necessary and effective. Over the following week, integration program participants reported multiple attempts at sabotage, harassment, and magical attack, all of which were thwarted by their coordinated defensive strategies. More importantly, the attacks seemed to strengthen rather than weaken the bonds between students from different houses. When someone tried to hex Terry Boot's textbooks, students from all 4 houses contributed replacement materials without being asked. When Hannah Abbott found her bed cursed with nightmare-inducing magic, Tracy Davis immediately offered to share her room until the situation could be resolved. The collaborative response to external threats was exactly what Harry had hoped to see, but he realized it would mean nothing if external authorities succeeded in shutting down the program entirely. That threat materialized on a grey November morning, when Professor Dumbledore called an emergency assembly in the Great Hall to address what he diplomatically termed concerns from the Ministry of Magic regarding recent educational innovations at Hogwarts. Minister Cornelius Fudge stood at the head table with the kind of pompous authority that made Harry's teeth ache, flanked by several other ministry officials whose expressions suggested they viewed educational reform as a form of dangerous sedition. "Students of Hogwarts," Fudge began, his voice magically amplified to carry throughout the hall. "The ministry has received troubling reports about experimental programs that may be undermining the stability and effectiveness of magical education." Harry felt anger building as Fudge continued with a prepared speech that characterized integration efforts as dangerous experimentation with unproven methods that threatened the time-tested approaches that have served the wizarding community for centuries. "Accordingly," Fudge announced, "the Ministry has decided to place Hogwarts under temporary administrative oversight, while a comprehensive review is conducted of all educational policies and their compliance with established standards. The implications hit Harry like cold water. Ministry oversight meant bureaucratic control, political interference, and the probable suspension of any program that challenged traditional approaches to magical education. Dumbledore rose from his seat with the kind of dignified calm that suggested he had been expecting exactly this development. "Minister Fudge," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been defending educational autonomy for decades, "I believe you will find that Hogwarts operates under a charter that grants the school considerable independence in matters of curriculum and student welfare." "Educational independence," Fudge replied with barely concealed irritation, "does not extend to radical experiments that may endanger student safety or undermine the social structures that maintain order in our community." "And what evidence," Professor McGonagall asked, rising to stand beside Dumbledore, "does the Ministry possess regarding danger to student safety or social order?" Fudge consulted a scroll that Harry suspected had been prepared by people like Lucius Malfoy, who had obvious political motivations for opposing integration. "Reports of magical attacks on students participating in unsanctioned programs," Fudge read. "Evidence of increased conflict between student factions. Concerns from respected families about the corruption of their children's educational experience." The distorted characterization of their situation made Harry's hands clench into fists. The Ministry was using the sabotage and attacks as justification for shutting down the very programs that were being targeted, effectively rewarding the people who had used intimidation and violence to prevent educational reform. "With respect, Minister," Hermione said, rising from her seat at the integrated table where program participants had chosen to sit together. "Those attacks were perpetrated against students supporting integration, not by them. Shutting down our programs would be equivalent to punishing the victims of harassment while allowing the perpetrators to achieve their goals." Fudge turned his attention to Hermione with the kind of dismissive expression he typically reserved for inconvenient facts that contradicted his political positions. "Miss Granger, I presume." "Yes, we have heard about your unique situation. Perhaps your perspective on these matters has been influenced by personal grievances rather than objective educational concerns." The condescending tone and obvious dismissal of Hermione's intelligence sent a wave of anger through the student body that was visible even from Harry's position across the hall. "My perspective," Hermione replied with icy precision, "is influenced by research, evidence, and direct experience with both traditional and integrated educational approaches. I would be happy to present academic data supporting the effectiveness of collaborative learning if the Ministry is interested in evidence-based policy decisions." The challenge in her words was unmistakable, and Harry could see several Ministry officials shifting uncomfortably as they realized they were being offered exactly the kind of objective analysis their political positions couldn't withstand. "The Ministry's concerns," one of Fudge's assistants interjected quickly, "extend beyond academic performance to broader questions of social stability and institutional continuity." "In other words," said a clear voice from the Ravenclaw table, "you're more concerned with maintaining political control than with educational effectiveness." The comment came from Cho Chang, whose practical directness had apparently overcome any inclination toward diplomatic language. Around her, other students were nodding with obvious agreement. "That is quite enough," Fudge said, his voice rising with bureaucratic outrage. "The Ministry will not be lectured by students who lack the experience and authority to understand the complexities of educational governance." "Then perhaps," Dumbledore said gently, "the Ministry would benefit from consulting educational experts who do possess the necessary experience and authority." "Such as?" Fudge asked skeptically. "Such as the International Confederation of Magical Education, whose observers have been studying our integration programs with considerable interest, or the Department of Magical Education at the University of Edinburgh, whose preliminary analysis suggests that collaborative learning approaches may represent the most significant advance in magical pedagogy in centuries. Harry stared at Dumbledore, realizing that the headmaster had been quietly building external support for their programs, while appearing to remain neutral in the political conflicts they had generated. "International observers?" Fudge asked, his tone suggesting that this was the first he had heard of outside interest in Hogwarts experiments. "Indeed. Representatives from magical educational institutions throughout Europe and beyond, who see our integration efforts as a potential model for addressing similar challenges in their own systems." Dumbledore gestured toward the back of the Great Hall, where Harry noticed for the first time that several adults in unfamiliar robes were seated at a table that had clearly been added for their benefit. "Perhaps Minister Fudge would like to meet Professor Dubois from the Académie de Magie in Paris, or Professor Kowalski from the Durmstrang Institute for Advanced Magical Studies. They have both expressed strong interest in implementing similar programs at their own institutions." The presence of international observers transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Fudge could dismiss student concerns and overrule Dumbledore's educational autonomy, but he could not afford to appear obstructionist or regressive in front of respected international colleagues. "I was not aware of international interest in these programs," Fudge admitted, clearly recalculating his political position. "The international magical education community," Professor Dubois said in accented English, rising from her position at the observers' table, "is very excited about the possibility of evidence-based collaborative learning. The preliminary results from Hogwarts suggest that integration approaches may solve many persistent problems with traditional magical education." "What kind of problems?" one of Fudge's assistants asked. "Student engagement, academic performance, preparation for collaborative careers in magical research, and international cooperation," Professor Kowalski replied in precise English. "Traditional house-based education often produces graduates who excel within narrow specializations, but struggle with interdisciplinary collaboration and cross-cultural communication." Harry found himself smiling as he watched the ministry officials process the implications of what they were hearing. Their political opposition to integration was being countered by educational experts who could speak with authority about international best practices and evidence-based outcomes. "Furthermore," Professor Dubois added, "our preliminary observations suggest that Hogwarts students participating in integration programs demonstrate superior problem-solving abilities, greater cultural competency, and more advanced collaborative skills compared to their peers in traditional programs. These are exactly the qualities," Professor Kowalski noted, "that magical employers and graduate programs are increasingly seeking in young wizards and witches entering the workforce." Fudge looked around the Great Hall, clearly recognizing that his political position had been severely undermined by the presence of international educational experts who contradicted every argument he had prepared. "The ministry, of course, supports educational innovation that benefits students and serves the broader magical community," he said finally, his tone suggesting defeat rather than conviction. "We simply want to ensure that any experimental programs meet appropriate standards for safety and effectiveness." "An entirely reasonable concern," Dumbledore agreed with apparent sincerity. "Perhaps the ministry would be willing to collaborate with international observers in developing assessment criteria that ensure both innovation and accountability." "That seems acceptable," Fudge replied, though his expression suggested he was not entirely sure how his attempt to shut down integration programs had turned into an offer of international collaboration. As the official assembly concluded and students began filing out of the Great Hall, Harry realized that they had survived another major challenge to their program. More than survived. They had gained international recognition and support that would make future political interference much more difficult. But as he walked back toward the integrated wing with other program participants, Harry noticed that several faces were missing from their group. Students whose parents had withdrawn them from Hogwarts rather than allow them to participate in what some families viewed as dangerous educational experimentation. "How many?" he asked Susan Bones. who had been tracking departures and their impact on the program. 7 so far, she replied quietly. 3 from Slytherin, 2 from Ravenclaw, 1 each from Gryffindor and Hufflepuff. All from families with strong traditional views about blood purity and house loyalty. The numbers were smaller than Harry had feared, but each departure represented not just a student lost to political pressure, but a family choosing ideology over their child's educational opportunities. Their loss, Daphne Greengrass said with quiet conviction, and eventually their regret. Harry looked at her questioningly. When they see what we've accomplished, she explained, when they watch us graduate with skills and perspectives that their children lack, when they realize that their fear of change cost their families real opportunities for growth, they'll regret choosing prejudice over progress. The confidence in her voice was infectious, and Harry found himself thinking about the academic achievements that integration program participants were already demonstrating. Hermione's performance in particular had reached levels that impressed even professors who had initially been skeptical about the program's benefits. Speaking of accomplishments, Hermione said, joining their conversation with an expression of excitement that suggested important news. I've just received the results from last month's standardized assessments. She produced a scroll of parchment that bore the official seal of the Department of Magical Education, her eyes shining with the kind of academic satisfaction that had always characterized her best achievements. Integration program participants scored an average of 18% higher than students in traditional house-based programs, she announced, across all subjects, all year levels, all background characteristics. The improvement was consistent regardless of students' original houses or family circumstances. The implications of these results hit Harry with the force of revelation. They had objective, measurable proof that integration worked, not just in theory or in terms of student satisfaction, but in terms of actual academic performance that would affect students' future opportunities and career prospects. Have you shared these results with the Integration Committee? Neville asked. Professor McGonagall has them, Hermione confirmed, and copies have been sent to all the international observers who attended today's assembly. Professor Dubois specifically requested detailed analysis of our assessment data for presentation at the International Conference on Magical Education next spring. The thought that their work at Hogwarts might influence magical education throughout Europe and beyond was both thrilling and intimidating. They had started with the simple goal of defending their friendship across house lines, and now they were contributing to a potential transformation of magical education on an international scale. There's something else, Hermione continued, consulting her notes with the methodical precision that had always characterized her approach to complex information. Professor Kowalski asked if we would be willing to host a delegation of students from Durmstrang who want to observe our integration methods and potentially implement similar programs at their own school. Students from other schools, Harry asked, coming here to learn about what we've created? Not just Durmstrang. Beauxbatons has also expressed interest, along with schools from Italy, Spain, and even some institutions in North America. Word is spreading through the international magical education community about the Hogwarts model of collaborative learning. Harry felt a mixture of pride and responsibility that was unlike anything he had experienced before. The friendship he and Hermione had defended was now part of a movement that was attracting attention from magical educators around the world. Are we ready for that kind of attention? Luna asked, with her characteristic ability to identify the essential question underlying complex situations. Harry considered her question seriously, thinking about the challenges they had faced, the resistance they had overcome, and the systems they had built to protect and support students who chose cooperation over tradition. I think we're as ready as we can be, he said finally. We have proof that integration works, support from international experts, and students who are willing to serve as examples of what collaborative learning can accomplish. He paused, looking around at the faces of friends and allies who had chosen to be pioneers in restoring the founder's vision of magical education. Besides, he added with a smile that reflected both confidence and determination. The founders didn't wait until they were perfectly ready to start Hogwarts. They began with an idea, a commitment to educational excellence, and the courage to try something that had never been attempted before. "Just like us," Hermione said, her expression radiant with the kind of satisfaction that came from seeing theoretical possibilities become practical realities. As they walked through corridors that no longer felt divided by artificial house boundaries, Harry realized that they had achieved something remarkable. Not just the restoration of the Founders' vision, not just the transformation of Hogwarts education, but the creation of a model that might influence magical learning throughout the world. The sabotage attempts, political pressure, and family boycotts had been intended to destroy their movement before it could prove itself effective. Instead, those challenges had forced them to develop stronger security, build broader coalitions, and demonstrate more convincingly that their approach produced superior results. Their opponents had inadvertently helped them become exactly what the magical education community needed: a thoroughly tested, internationally validated example of how collaborative learning could transform the preparation of young witches and wizards for an increasingly complex and interconnected world. The revolution that had begun with a friendship across house lines had become a model for educational excellence that would outlast any individual student's time at Hogwarts. And it was just the beginning. As Harry settled into the common room, where students from all 4 houses were working together on assignments that would have been impossible under the traditional system, he realized that they had created something that would continue to grow and evolve long after they graduated. The Founders' vision was no longer just restored. It was being constantly renewed by each new student who chose cooperation over competition, friendship over prejudice, and learning over tradition. The implementation challenges they had faced had only made their success more meaningful and their model more resilient. Tomorrow would bring new obstacles, new opportunities, and new students who would need to choose between the comfort of familiar divisions and the challenge of genuine collaboration. But tonight, Harry was content to sit surrounded by friends from all houses, working together toward common goals, proving every day that the magic of cooperation was stronger than any spell designed to keep them apart. Chapter 10. Hearts and Minds. The transformation began, as many meaningful changes do, with a moment of quiet courage that went almost unnoticed by everyone except those whose lives it would forever alter. Draco Malfoy stood outside the Great Hall on a crisp December morning, his pale hands clenched around a piece of parchment that had taken him 3 weeks and 7 drafts to complete. The letter in his hands represented more than words on paper. It was a repudiation of everything his family had taught him about blood purity, house loyalty, and the proper order of wizarding society. More than that, it was an apology. Harry noticed Draco's presence first, the familiar figure standing with uncharacteristic hesitation near the entrance, where students traditionally posted announcements and notices for the school community. Something about Draco's posture, uncertain rather than arrogant, vulnerable rather than commanding, made Harry pause in his conversation with Neville and approach cautiously. "Malfoy," Harry said quietly. "Are you all right?" Draco looked up with eyes that showed signs of sleepless nights and internal struggle. In his hands, the parchment trembled slightly with what might have been nervousness or determination. "Potter," Draco replied, his voice lacking its usual drawling superiority. "I need to. There's something I have to do. Something I should have done weeks ago." He gestured toward the notice board with the kind of gesture that suggested he was forcing himself through sheer willpower to complete an action that terrified him. "I'm posting a formal apology," he said simply. "To Granger. To everyone I've hurt with my words and actions. To anyone who's been harmed by the prejudices I was taught to believe and promote." Harry stared at Draco, trying to reconcile this nervous, conscience-stricken young man with the arrogant blood purist who had made Hermione's life miserable for years. That's a brave thing to do, Harry said finally. It's the right thing to do, Draco corrected, and I've spent too much time being a coward to delay any longer. He approached the notice board with the measured steps of someone walking toward a precipice, then carefully pinned his letter to the center, where it would be impossible for anyone entering or leaving the hall to miss. Harry read over Draco's shoulder, his amazement growing with each line of elegant script that revealed depths of self-reflection and moral courage he had never expected from a Malfoy. To the students and faculty of Hogwarts, and most particularly to Hermione Granger. I write this letter to acknowledge wrongs I have committed and prejudices I have promoted during my time at this school. For years I allowed family expectations and social pressure to excuse behavior that I now recognize as cruel, ignorant, and fundamentally opposed to the values that should guide any decent person. I have used language intended to dehumanize and demean fellow students based on their family backgrounds. I have promoted the lie that blood status determines magical ability or personal worth. I have contributed to an atmosphere of division and hostility when I should have been learning to value the different perspectives and experiences that make our community stronger. Most particularly, I owe Hermione Granger an apology that no words can adequately express. Her intelligence, courage, and dedication to learning have consistently surpassed my own, despite, or perhaps because of, the Muggle heritage I was taught to despise. She has proven through her actions that the prejudices my family instilled in me are not just wrong, but foolishly self-limiting. Watching her excel in Slytherin House while maintaining her principles and extending friendship to those who had shown her only hostility has taught me more about true Slytherin values: ambition directed toward justice, cunning applied to worthy causes, resourcefulness used to benefit others, than years of family instruction about blood purity and social superiority. To those students who have joined the integration movement despite family pressure and social disapproval, you have shown courage that I lacked for too long. Your willingness to choose friendship over prejudice, cooperation over competition, and truth over comfortable lies has created something at Hogwarts that is genuinely transformative. To those who, like me, have been slow to abandon inherited prejudices, I hope my example can serve as evidence that it is never too late to choose growth over stagnation, principle over convenience, love over hate. I cannot undo the harm my words and actions have caused, but I can commit to using whatever influence and resources I possess to support the kind of magical education and community that honors the best qualities in all people, regardless of their origins. With profound regret for past failures and firm commitment to future improvement, Draco Lucius Malfoy, Harry finished reading in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what Draco had just done. This wasn't just an apology. It was a complete repudiation of the ideology that had shaped his entire upbringing, a public declaration that he was choosing principle over family loyalty. "Draco," Harry said quietly, "this is going to cost you everything. Your family, your social position, probably your inheritance. It's going to cost me everything I never should have valued in the first place," Draco replied, with a steadiness that suggested he had already counted the cost and accepted it. "Besides, what's the alternative? Spending the rest of my life being the kind of person my father wants me to be, living with the knowledge that I chose cowardice and prejudice over the chance to be genuinely useful." Before Harry could respond, students began gathering around the notice board as word spread that Draco Malfoy had posted something remarkable. The reaction was immediate and intense. Gasps of surprise, excited conversations, and expressions of amazement that reflected how unprecedented this public acknowledgement was. Hermione arrived within minutes, drawn by the growing crowd and the mention of her name in multiple excited conversations. Harry watched her face as she read Draco's letter, seeing surprise give way to something that looked like cautious hope. "Draco," she said when she had finished reading, her voice carefully controlled but not unkind, This is unexpected. It's overdue, Draco replied, and insufficient, but it's a beginning. What made you change your mind? Hermione asked, with the genuine curiosity she brought to all complex phenomena. Draco considered the question seriously, his pale eyes reflecting the kind of introspection that Harry had never associated with him. Watching you prove that everything I'd been taught was wrong, he said simply. Seeing my housemates respect you not because of your blood status, but despite their training to despise it. Realizing that the people I'd been calling inferior were actually superior to me in every way that mattered. He paused, looking around at the growing crowd of students who were listening to their conversation with obvious fascination, and watching Potter risk everything to defend friendship across house lines, while I sat silent, afraid to challenge ideas I knew were wrong. That showed me what courage actually looks like, and made me ashamed of my own cowardice. The simple honesty in Draco's words had a visible impact on the students surrounding them. Harry could see expressions changing from skepticism to consideration, from automatic suspicion to tentative acceptance. What happens now? Susan Bones asked, voicing the question that everyone was thinking. Now, Draco said with a slight smile that was entirely different from his usual smirk, I spend the rest of my time at Hogwarts trying to prove that people can change, and that redemption is possible for anyone willing to work for it. The impact of Draco's public apology extended far beyond the immediate reactions of students who witnessed it. Over the following days, Harry watched ripple effects spread throughout the school as other students began reconsidering their own positions on integration, house loyalty, and the prejudices they had inherited from family and tradition. The most surprising conversion came from Percy Weasley. Harry was studying in the library when Percy approached his table with the kind of formal bearing that suggested official business. But instead of the lecture about responsibility and proper behavior that Harry expected, Percy carried a thick folder of documents and an expression of barely concealed amazement. "Harry," Percy said, settling into the chair across from him with uncharacteristic lack of ceremony. "I owe you an apology." The statement was so unexpected that Harry looked up from his transfiguration notes with complete bewilderment. "What for?" Percy opened his folder and spread out several pieces of parchment covered with charts, graphs, and statistical analyses. "For being wrong about everything," Percy said simply. "About house loyalty, about the integration program, about whether cooperation could possibly produce better outcomes than traditional competition." He pointed to the first chart, which showed academic performance data across all subjects and year levels. "These are the official end-of-term evaluations from Professor McGonagall's office," Percy continued. "Students participating in integration programs have shown improvement in every single measured category. Not just slight improvement, dramatic improvement that exceeds anything we've seen in the historical records." Harry leaned forward to examine the data, seeing confirmation of what he had observed anecdotally, but had never seen quantified so precisely. "Transfiguration scores up 23%, Percy read from his notes. Potions performance improved by 31%. Defense against the dark arts practical examinations showing 37% improvement in collaborative spell work." "That's incredible," Harry said. "Harry, it's unprecedented," Percy corrected, "and it's not limited to academic performance. Social integration surveys show that students in the program report higher satisfaction, stronger friendships across traditional boundaries, and greater confidence in their magical abilities." Harry studied Percy's expression, seeing the kind of intellectual honesty that made him respect his friend's brother, despite their political disagreements. "What changed your mind?" Harry asked. Percy gestured to the data with the reverence he typically reserved for official ministry documents. "Evidence," he said simply. "I built my opposition to your program on assumptions about tradition and institutional stability. But when those assumptions conflict with measurable outcomes that benefit students, intellectual integrity requires abandoning the assumptions." He paused, organizing his thoughts with the methodical precision that characterized his approach to complex problems. I was wrong to prioritize abstract principles like house loyalty over concrete benefits like improved learning and stronger community. I was wrong to assume that traditional approaches were automatically superior to innovative methods, and I was wrong to let political concerns override educational goals. The admission represented a complete reversal of everything Percy had argued during their confrontation in the Gryffindor common room, and Harry found himself impressed by the moral courage required for such a public change of position. "Does this mean you support integration now?" Harry asked. "It means I support whatever approaches produce the best outcomes for students," Percy replied, "and the evidence clearly demonstrates that collaborative learning across house lines produces superior results compared to traditional segregated education." Percy's conversion proved to be a catalyst for broader changes in faculty attitudes toward integration. Within days of his announcement that he would be joining the program's administrative support committee, other professors began publicly acknowledging the academic benefits they had observed. Professor McGonagall's comments during a staff meeting, which were quickly repeated by students who overheard them, reflected growing institutional support. The integration participants consistently demonstrate superior collaborative skills, greater creativity in problem-solving, and more sophisticated understanding of how different magical approaches can complement each other. Even more surprising was the gradual shift in Professor Snape's attitude toward the program, and, specifically, toward Hermione's role in it. Harry first noticed the change during a potions lesson, where Hermione was demonstrating a modification to the standard strengthening solution that incorporated techniques from all four house traditions. Instead of his usual cold disapproval of student innovation, Snape watched her work with what appeared to be genuine professional interest. "Miss Granger," Snape said when she had completed the brewing process, "explain your theoretical basis for combining Ravenclaw precision with Slytherin efficiency in the preparation phase." The question was posed without his typical sarcasm, as if he were genuinely curious about her methodology, rather than looking for opportunities to criticize. "The Ravenclaw approach emphasizes perfect measurement and timing," Hermione replied, apparently as surprised as Harry by Snape's professional tone. "But Slytherin techniques for ingredient preparation can reduce brewing time without compromising effectiveness, which allows for more complex potions to be attempted within class periods." "And the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff contributions?" Snape continued. "Gryffindor willingness to attempt challenging techniques provides the courage needed for advanced brewing," Hermione said, gaining confidence as she realized this was a genuine academic discussion. "While Hufflepuff patience and attention to detail ensure that innovative approaches are applied safely rather than recklessly." Snape examined her finished potion with the thoroughness of someone evaluating a masterwork, then made a note in what appeared to be a personal research journal. "Interesting," he said quietly. "Your integration of different house approaches has produced results that exceed what any single methodology could achieve." The admission was delivered in Snape's characteristic monotone, but Harry could see that it represented a significant acknowledgement of the practical benefits of collaborative learning. "The theoretical implications," Snape continued, "suggest that traditional house-based instruction may actually limit students' potential by restricting their exposure to complementary techniques and perspectives." Harry stared at Snape, hardly believing that the potions master was publicly acknowledging the educational value of integration. This was the same professor who had spent years promoting Slytherin superiority and dismissing the contributions of other houses. "Does this mean," Daphne Greengrass asked carefully, "that you would support expanding collaborative approaches in potions instruction?" Snape was quiet for a long moment, apparently weighing his response with the caution of someone whose professional reputation was built on maintaining consistent positions. "I support," he said finally, "whatever instructional methods produce the most competent potion students. Miss Granger's demonstration suggests that collaborative approaches may indeed be superior to traditional house-based instruction for advanced brewing techniques. The statement was carefully qualified, but coming from Snape, it represented an extraordinary endorsement of everything they had been working to achieve. As word of Snape's comments spread through the school, Harry began to notice a shift in how students viewed the integration program. Instead of seeing it as a challenge to legitimate tradition, more and more students were beginning to view it as an educational innovation that could benefit everyone. The change was perhaps most visible in the growing number of former opponents who requested to join integration activities. Marcus Flint's application to participate in inter-house Quidditch matches was particularly surprising. The same student who had physically attacked Hermione for challenging Slytherin traditions now approached Harry with a proposal for reforming athletic competition along collaborative lines. "Potter," Flint said, cornering Harry after a particularly successful integration study session. "I want to talk to you about Quidditch." Harry tensed, expecting another confrontation or attempt to undermine their programs. "What about it?" "I want to organize matches based on skill and interest rather than house affiliation," Flint said without preamble. "Mixed teams, collaborative strategies, focus on excellence rather than tribal loyalty." Harry stared at Marcus, trying to process what he was hearing. "Why?" he asked. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, apparently struggling with the same kind of honesty that had characterized Draco's transformation. "Because watching you and Granger prove that cooperation works better than competition made me realize how much potential I've wasted fighting people instead of learning from them," he said finally. "And because I'm tired of being the kind of person who uses violence to solve problems that require intelligence and creativity." The proposal Marcus outlined was remarkably sophisticated, incorporating elements from all 4 house Quidditch traditions into a system that would allow students to form teams based on complementary skills rather than arbitrary house assignments. Gryffindor aerial courage combined with Slytherin strategic thinking, Marcus explained. Ravenclaw tactical analysis supported by Hufflepuff teamwork and endurance. Every team would have access to all 4 approaches, instead of being limited to their house's traditional style. Harry found himself impressed not just by the practical aspects of Marcus's proposal, but by the personal growth it represented. This was someone who had used physical intimidation and house prejudice to maintain social position, now advocating for collaborative approaches that would benefit everyone. "What changed your mind?" Harry asked. Marcus considered the question with the kind of serious reflection that Harry had never associated with him. "Watching Granger outperform everyone in Slytherin while still maintaining friendships with people from other houses," he said honestly. "Realizing that the strength I thought came from exclusion and superiority actually came from fear and insecurity." He paused, apparently gathering courage for a more personal admission. "And seeing how much more accomplished you've all become since you started working together instead of against each other. I want to be part of something that builds people up instead of tearing them down." The changes in individual attitudes were perhaps most visible in the evolving relationship between Hermione and Theodore Nott. Harry first noticed their growing connection during a collaborative ancient runes study session, where Theo's expertise in runic etymology complemented Hermione's systematic approach to translation and analysis. What began as academic partnership gradually developed into something deeper as they discovered shared interests in magical theory, historical research, and the practical applications of collaborative learning. "Theo's been helping me research the original runic inscriptions in the Founder's Chamber," Hermione explained to Harry one evening as they walked back from the library. "His knowledge of pre-medieval magical languages is extraordinary, and he's been able to translate documents that I couldn't interpret on my own." Harry studied Hermione's expression as she talked about Theo, noting the warmth and excitement that characterized her discussion of their collaboration. "He sounds like a good research partner," Harry said carefully. "He is," Hermione agreed, then paused with the kind of hesitation that suggested she was considering whether to share something more personal. He's also become a very good friend. Someone I can talk to about the challenges of being in Slytherin, about family pressure to conform to expectations I don't share, about the loneliness that comes from being different. The description resonated with Harry's own experience of feeling isolated and misunderstood, though he realized that Hermione's situation was more complex than his own. "What's his family situation?" Harry asked. "Similar to Draco's in many ways. Pure-blood traditions, expectations about social hierarchy, pressure to maintain family reputation. But Theo's approach to dealing with it is different." "Different how?" Hermione smiled with the kind of affection that made Harry feel a complex mixture of happiness for his friend and something that might have been jealousy. "He's choosing quiet resistance over dramatic confrontation," she said. "Building relationships across house lines without making public declarations that would put his family at risk. Supporting integration through actions rather than announcements." Harry found himself thinking about the courage required for such an approach, the discipline to maintain principles while avoiding unnecessary conflict with powerful family and social forces. "Do you like him?" Harry asked, then immediately regretted the directness of the question. Hermione's blush was answer enough, though she responded with her characteristic honesty. "Yes," she said simply. "More than I expected to like anyone, especially someone from a family background so similar to the people who have made my life difficult." Harry felt something twist in his chest at her admission, a complex emotion that took him several moments to identify as protective concern, mixed with what he was forced to acknowledge might be romantic jealousy. The realization that his feelings for Hermione had evolved beyond simple friendship hit Harry with unexpected force. Over the months of fighting together for integration, defending each other against institutional pressure, and building something genuinely meaningful at Hogwarts, his protective instincts and deep affection had developed into something more complex and potentially problematic. He cared about Hermione's happiness more than his own comfort, which meant that if she found genuine connection with Theodore Nott, Harry's personal feelings were irrelevant to what was best for her. The thought was both mature and deeply uncomfortable. "I'm glad you found someone you connect with," Harry said, meaning it despite the complicated emotions the admission stirred up. "Especially someone who understands the unique challenges you've faced in Slytherin." "Thank you," Hermione said, her expression reflecting gratitude for his understanding. "I wasn't sure how you'd react to the possibility that my closest relationships might include people you don't know well." "Hermione," Harry said seriously, "your happiness matters more to me than any personal preferences I might have about who provides it. If Theo makes you happy, then I'm grateful to him, regardless of what house he's in or what family he comes from." The conversation continued as they walked through corridors that no longer felt divided by artificial house boundaries, but Harry found himself processing complex emotions that he wasn't entirely prepared to handle. His feelings for Hermione had grown gradually and quietly, hidden beneath their friendship and shared commitment to integration. Acknowledging them now, when she was developing a relationship with someone else, felt both necessary and painful. But perhaps that was exactly what mature love looked like, caring more about someone's happiness than your own emotional comfort, supporting their choices even when those choices didn't include you in the way you might prefer. The thought was both humbling and, in its own way, liberating. As December progressed and the winter holidays approached, Harry began to notice another significant development: family reconciliation processes that were healing divisions created by students' participation in integration programs. The first breakthrough came with Daphne Greengrass, whose parents requested a meeting with Professor Dumbledore to discuss their daughter's involvement in what they had initially viewed as dangerous educational experimentation. Harry wasn't present for the meeting, but Daphne shared the results with the integration community afterward. "They came prepared to demand my withdrawal from the program," she explained to a gathered group in the common room. They'd heard rumors about radical politics, dangerous innovations, anti-traditional propaganda, all the fears that opponents of integration have been promoting. "What changed their minds?" Susan asked. "Evidence," Daphne replied with a smile that reflected both relief and satisfaction. Professor Dumbledore showed them my academic records, my assessment scores, letters of recommendation from international educational observers. Then he arranged for them to speak with Professor McGonagall about my performance in Transfiguration, and with Professor Flitwick about my collaborative charm work. She paused, apparently savouring the memory of her parents' surprise. By the end of the meeting, they were asking how other schools could implement similar programs for my younger siblings. The pattern was repeated over the following weeks, as other parents requested meetings to evaluate the integration program based on evidence rather than political rhetoric. In most cases, academic data and direct observation of student outcomes overcame ideological opposition to collaborative learning. "It's remarkable," Professor McGonagall observed during one of the integration committee meetings that Harry was invited to attend. "When families focus on educational outcomes rather than political positions, support for integration is virtually unanimous." The observation highlighted something Harry had begun to notice about opposition to their programs. It was strongest among people who had no direct experience with integration, and weakest among those who could observe its actual effects on student learning and development. As the winter holidays began and students prepared to return to families who had often been skeptical or hostile toward integration efforts, Harry realized that they had achieved something remarkable. Not just academic success or institutional recognition, but genuine transformation in how people thought about cooperation, friendship, and the possibilities of educational innovation. The movement that had begun with his determination to defend friendship across house lines had become a catalyst for broader social change that extended far beyond Hogwarts walls. Sitting in the integrated common room on the last evening before holiday break, surrounded by friends from all four houses who were planning collaborative projects to pursue during their time away from school, Harry felt a deep satisfaction that was unlike anything he had experienced before. They had proven that the founders' vision was not just historically accurate, but practically superior to the system that had replaced it. They had demonstrated that cooperation produced better results than competition, that friendship could transcend artificial boundaries, that education worked best when it brought diverse perspectives together rather than keeping them apart. More than that, they had shown that individual transformation was possible, that people could choose growth over stagnation, that hearts and minds could change when presented with evidence and examples of something better. Draco's public apology had inspired other students to reconsider their inherited prejudices. Percy's intellectual honesty had provided institutional support for evidence-based policy changes. Snape's professional acknowledgement had validated their educational innovations. Marcus Flint's conversion had shown that even former opponents could become allies, and throughout it all, Hermione's example of excellence, integrity, and bridge building had proven that the Sorting Hat's original placement was not just correct, but visionary. As Harry prepared for what would be his first holiday break since the integration movement began, he realized that they were no longer fighting for acceptance or defending their right to friendship across house lines. They were leading a transformation that would reshape magical education for generations to come. The revolution was complete, but the work of building something better was just beginning. And for the first time since this entire journey had started, Harry was confident that whatever challenges lay ahead, they had the knowledge, the relationships, and the proven methods necessary to overcome them. The founders' vision was no longer a historical curiosity. It was a living reality that grew stronger with each student who chose cooperation over competition, friendship over prejudice, and love over hate. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to prove that the magic of working together was more powerful than any spell designed to keep them apart, and Harry looked forward to discovering what they could accomplish when their work continued beyond the walls of Hogwarts and into the broader magical community that was watching their success with growing interest and hope. Chapter 11. New Traditions. Bravery. The idea for Founders' Unity Day emerged from a conversation in the integrated common room on a snowy January evening, when Luna Lovegood made one of her characteristically simple observations that contained depths of wisdom others had missed. "We should celebrate what we've built," she said, looking up from the collaborative arithmancy project that had occupied students from all 4 houses for the past 3 hours. Not just defend it or explain it, but genuinely celebrate it as something beautiful and worth preserving. Harry paused in his review of ancient runes translations, struck by the rightness of Luna's suggestion. They had spent so much time fighting for integration, proving its effectiveness, and protecting it from opposition that they had never simply acknowledged what an extraordinary achievement they had created together. "What kind of celebration?" Hermione asked, her strategic mind immediately moving toward practical implementation. "Something that honors where we came from while celebrating where we're going," Luna replied, with the dreamy certainty that characterized her best insights. "Something that shows how the Founders' original vision has grown into something even more beautiful than they imagined." "A new tradition," Neville said, understanding dawning in his voice. "Something that becomes part of Hogwarts culture permanently, not just a one-time event." The concept resonated through the assembled students with the kind of immediate recognition that characterized truly good ideas. Within minutes, they were deep in planning discussions for what would become the first annual Founders' Unity Day celebration. "Each house should contribute something that represents their best traditions," Susan Bones suggested, "not in competition with each other, but as gifts to the whole school community." "Gryffindor courage ceremonies," Harry said, warming to the idea. "Something that celebrates the bravery it takes to stand up for what's right, especially when it's difficult." "Slytherin ambition challenges," Daphne Greengrass added. "Recognition for students who use their cunning and resourcefulness to benefit others rather than just themselves." "Ravenclaw wisdom competitions," Anthony Goldstein said, with obvious enthusiasm. "But collaborative ones, where teams work together to solve complex problems that require multiple perspectives." "And Hufflepuff loyalty bonds," Ernie Macmillan concluded. "Ceremonies that celebrate the connections we've built across traditional boundaries, the friendships that have grown stronger through shared challenges." As the planning session continued late into the evening, Harry found himself marveling at how naturally students from different houses were working together to create something that would honor all 4 traditions while transcending the limitations that had historically kept them separate. "We need official recognition," Hermione said, consulting notes she had been making throughout their discussion. "Not just student enthusiasm, but institutional support that ensures this becomes a permanent part of Hogwarts culture." "I'll speak with Professor Dumbledore," Harry offered. "The Integration Committee has been looking for ways to formalize some of our innovations, and this seems like exactly the kind of tradition that should be preserved." The conversation with Dumbledore took place 3 days later in the headmaster's office, where Harry had once faced institutional pressure to abandon his friendship with Hermione. Now he sat across from the same desk, representing not just personal conviction, but a movement that had transformed the entire school. "Founders' Unity Day," Dumbledore repeated thoughtfully, his blue eyes twinkling with what appeared to be genuine delight. "A celebration that honors the original vision, while acknowledging how that vision has evolved through student innovation and courage." "Exactly," Harry said. "Something that becomes part of Hogwarts tradition permanently, not dependent on the particular students who happen to be here at any given time." Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, studying Harry with the kind of attention that suggested he was evaluating more than just the specific proposal. "You realize," the headmaster said gently, "that creating new traditions requires more than enthusiasm and good intentions. It requires institutional commitment that outlasts the people who initiate the changes." "Which is why we're requesting official recognition," Harry replied. "Not just permission to hold one celebration, but establishment of annual observances that will continue regardless of future changes in school administration or student leadership. And you believe such traditions will serve the long-term interests of Hogwarts education? Harry considered the question seriously, thinking about everything they had learned during their months of building integration programs and demonstrating their effectiveness. I believe, he said finally, that traditions which encourage cooperation, celebrate achievement that benefits others, and honor the courage required to build bridges rather than walls will always serve educational interests better than traditions that promote division and competition. Dumbledore smiled with the kind of warmth that Harry remembered from their earliest conversations, before political pressures and institutional conflicts had complicated their relationship. Very well, the headmaster said. I will present your proposal to the Board of Governors at their next meeting. Given the international attention Hogwarts has received for its integration innovations, I suspect they will be quite receptive to formalizing celebrations that showcase our educational leadership. The official approval came within 2 weeks, accompanied by something Harry had not expected: the creation of new student leadership positions specifically designed to support and coordinate inter-house cooperation. Professor McGonagall announced the positions during a school assembly that had been called to discuss plans for the upcoming Founders' Unity Day celebration. The Integration Committee, McGonagall said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the packed Great Hall, has recommended the establishment of 2 new student leadership roles that will help coordinate collaborative activities and serve as representatives for inter-house cooperation. Harry felt anticipation building throughout the assembled students as McGonagall continued. The first position is inter-house ambassador, a role designed for students who have demonstrated exceptional ability to work across traditional house boundaries and facilitate cooperation between different communities within the school. McGonagall paused, allowing the significance of the new position to register with students who had grown up believing that house loyalty precluded broader school leadership. The Integration Committee has unanimously recommended Hermione Granger for this position, in recognition of her groundbreaking research into the Founder's original educational vision, her leadership in developing collaborative learning programs, and her remarkable ability to bridge differences between students from all 4 houses. The applause that greeted this announcement was thunderous and sustained, coming from students across all house tables who had observed Hermione's transformation from isolated Slytherin to genuine bridge builder between traditionally separated communities. Harry felt pride swelling in his chest as he watched Hermione accept the recognition with characteristic grace and obvious emotion. This was more than just acknowledgement of her individual achievements. It was institutional validation of the entire integration movement and the principles they had fought to establish. The second position, McGonagall continued once the applause had subsided, is Unity Champion, a role for students who have shown extraordinary courage in defending collaborative principles and supporting fellow students who faced pressure to abandon cross-house relationships. Harry's heart began beating faster as he realized where this announcement was heading. The Integration Committee has recommended Harry Potter for this position in recognition of his unwavering loyalty to friendship across house lines, his leadership in organizing security and support for integration participants, and his courage in choosing principles over convenience when faced with institutional and political pressure. The response to Harry's appointment was even more enthusiastic than Hermione's, with students throughout the hall rising to their feet in acknowledgement of the personal risks he had taken and the leadership he had shown throughout the integration movement. As Harry stood to acknowledge the applause, he caught sight of Draco Malfoy leading the Slytherin table in what appeared to be genuinely enthusiastic recognition. The transformation represented by that single image, a Malfoy applauding Harry Potter's appointment to a position celebrating inter-house cooperation, captured everything they had accomplished over the past year. Both positions, McGonagall concluded, will become permanent parts of Hogwarts student leadership, with future holders selected through collaborative processes involving all 4 houses working together. The significance of this development extended far beyond recognition for Harry and Hermione personally. By creating institutional positions dedicated to inter-house cooperation, Hogwarts was ensuring that integration would continue regardless of future changes in student population or administrative priorities. But the most profound changes became apparent during the house point system reforms that were announced the following week. Professor Flitwick, representing the academic faculty, presented the new system during what had become regular integration committee updates to the full school community. Beginning immediately, Flitwick announced, house points will be awarded not just for individual achievement within house communities, but for collaborative accomplishments that involve students working across traditional boundaries. The new system retained traditional point awards for academic achievement, rule adherence, and positive behavior, but added significant point bonuses for inter-house collaboration, cross-cultural friendship, and projects that benefited the entire school community. Furthermore, Flitwick continued, the House Cup competition will now include categories for collaborative achievement, with recognition for houses that most effectively support their members' participation in inter-house activities. Harry realized that the reformed point system would fundamentally alter the incentive structure that had historically encouraged house competition over school unity. Students would now be rewarded for building bridges rather than maintaining barriers. But perhaps the most remarkable innovation was the announcement of changes to the sorting ceremony itself. Professor McGonagall explained the new approach during a special assembly held just before the spring term's end-of-year sorting for transfer students and late admissions. The sorting hat, McGonagall announced, will now offer certain students the option of declaring a secondary house in addition to their primary house placement. The concept was revolutionary and entirely in keeping with the founder's original vision of students experiencing multiple house philosophies during their education. Students who demonstrate significant traits from multiple houses may choose to participate in activities and communities from both their primary house and their secondary house, McGonagall explained. This option acknowledges that many students possess complex character traits that cannot be fully captured by single house placement. The first student to benefit from the new option was a transfer student from Beauxbatons, whose sorting took nearly 8 minutes as the hat deliberated between Ravenclaw intellectual curiosity and Hufflepuff collaborative dedication. Ravenclaw, the hat finally announced, with Hufflepuff secondary house option, should you choose to accept it. The students' immediate acceptance of both placements drew enthusiastic applause from tables throughout the hall, but Harry noticed that the most sustained response came from integration program participants who understood the personal significance of being officially recognized for complex character traits. As the spring term progressed toward the first official Founders' Unity Day celebration, Harry began to notice another significant development: the return of alumni who wanted to observe and participate in the innovations that had transformed their former school. The first returnee was Oliver Wood, whose letter to Professor McGonagall had requested permission to observe the inter-house Quidditch matches that Marcus Flint had organized based on collaborative principles rather than house competition. I spent 7 years believing that house rivalry was essential to competitive excellence, Oliver explained to Harry during a conversation before one of the mixed team matches. I was wrong, and I want to understand how cooperation can produce better results than the antagonism I promoted. Oliver's presence at the match and his obvious amazement at the level of teamwork and strategic sophistication demonstrated by players working across traditional house boundaries attracted attention from other former students who began requesting opportunities to observe the changes at their former school. Word is spreading through the alumni community, Professor McGonagall told Harry during one of their regular meetings about integration program administration. Graduates who remember the limitations of traditional house separation are eager to see how integration has addressed problems they experienced during their own time here. The alumni interest culminated in a formal reunion event scheduled to coincide with Founders' Unity Day, bringing together graduates from the past decade who wanted to understand and potentially support the educational innovations they had heard about through professional networks. The conversations Harry observed during the reunion were both inspiring and deeply moving. I spent most of my time at Hogwarts convinced that students from other houses were automatically less interesting or valuable than my own housemates, one former Ravenclaw told a group of current integration participants. I graduated with excellent academic credentials, but terrible collaborative skills, and it took years in the professional world to unlearn the competitive mindset that Hogwarts had reinforced. I regret not getting to know students like you, a former Gryffindor said to Daphne Greengrass during a discussion about inter-house academic collaboration. I'm sure I missed opportunities for friendships and learning experiences that would have enriched my entire education. But perhaps the most significant validation came from the international delegations that began arriving at Hogwarts to observe integration programs and evaluate their potential application at other magical educational institutions. The first formal delegation came from the Académie de Magie in Paris, led by Professor Dubois, and including representatives from 5 other European magical schools. Their week-long visit involved classroom observations, student interviews, faculty discussions, and detailed analysis of academic outcome data. The integration model you have developed, Professor Dubois told the assembled integration committee at the conclusion of her visit, represents the most significant advance in magical education methodology since the establishment of formal magical schools in the medieval period. Her final report, copies of which were shared with magical educational institutions throughout Europe, recommended that collaborative learning approaches be implemented as quickly as possible to address persistent problems with student preparation for international magical careers. Traditional house-based education produces graduates who excel within narrow cultural contexts, but struggle with cross-cultural collaboration and interdisciplinary problem-solving, the report concluded. The Hogwarts integration model demonstrates that students can achieve superior academic outcomes while developing the collaborative skills essential for professional success in an interconnected magical world. The international recognition culminated in an invitation for Hermione to present her research at the International Conference on Magical Education, where her comprehensive analysis of integration benefits would be published in the most prestigious educational journal in the magical world. Educational Integration in Magical Schools, Evidence from the Hogwarts Model, Hermione's paper was titled, and Harry felt profound pride as he read advance copies of research that would influence magical education policy throughout Europe and beyond. And the paper documented everything they had learned during their year of building integration programs, academic improvement data, social integration outcomes, long-term career preparation benefits, and recommendations for implementation at other institutions. But beyond the statistical analysis and policy recommendations, Hermione's writing captured the essential truth that had motivated their entire movement, that cooperation produced better results than competition, that diversity strengthened rather than weakened educational communities, and that the courage to challenge inherited prejudices was essential for genuine educational excellence. The evidence demonstrates conclusively, Hermione wrote in her conclusion, that collaborative learning approaches based on the integration of different house traditions produce superior outcomes across all measured categories. Students participating in inter-house programs show improved academic performance, stronger collaborative skills, greater cultural competency, and enhanced preparation for professional careers requiring interdisciplinary teamwork. More fundamentally, the paper continued, integration programs demonstrate that artificial barriers between different educational communities serve no legitimate pedagogical purpose and actively undermine the collaborative skills that magical professionals increasingly require in their careers. The transformation of Hogwarts from a collection of competing house communities to an integrated educational environment that honors diverse traditions while promoting collaborative excellence provides a model that other magical educational institutions can adapt to their own cultural contexts and institutional needs. As Harry read Hermione's academic analysis of everything they had built together, he realized that their personal journey from friendship under fire to educational leadership had become something larger than either of them had imagined when they first chose cooperation over convenience or Their story was becoming part of Hogwarts legend, passed down to younger students as an example of what could be accomplished when people chose courage over comfort, principle over prejudice, and love over hatred. The first Founders' Unity Day celebration, held on a warm May afternoon that seemed designed for new beginnings, brought together everything they had created into a single day of recognition, gratitude, and commitment to continuing the work of building bridges across traditional divisions. The Gryffindor Courage ceremonies honored students who had shown bravery in defending unpopular principles, standing up for friends who faced pressure to conform, and choosing difficult paths that served the greater good. Harry found himself deeply moved by the recognition given to students like Neville, whose quiet courage had supported integration from its earliest days, and Draco, whose transformation had inspired others to question their own inherited prejudices. The Slytherin Ambition challenges celebrated students who had used their cunning and resourcefulness to benefit others, rather than just themselves. Hermione's selection as the primary honoree reflected not just her individual achievements, but the way she had redefined Slytherin values to emphasize service to the community rather than personal advancement. The Ravenclaw Wisdom competitions brought together collaborative teams working on complex problems that required multiple perspectives and interdisciplinary approaches. The winning team's solution to a theoretical problem about magical education in remote communities drew upon knowledge from all four house traditions and would later be published in academic journals as a genuine contribution to educational theory. The Hufflepuff Loyalty Bonds ceremonies honored the friendships and collaborative relationships that had grown across traditional boundaries, recognizing students who had chosen connection over convenience and maintained commitments to others despite social pressure to abandon them. But the most meaningful moment came during the closing ceremony, when Professor Dumbledore addressed the assembled school community about the permanent changes that integration had brought to Hogwarts. "We gather today not to celebrate the end of a successful experiment," Dumbledore said, his voice carrying clearly across the Great Hall that had been transformed into a unified celebration space with decorations from all four houses, but to recognize the beginning of new traditions that will guide Hogwarts education for generations to come. The students who initiated these changes have proven that the founders' original vision was not just historically accurate, but practically superior to the system that replaced it. They have demonstrated that cooperation produces better results than competition, that diversity strengthens rather than weakens educational communities, and that the courage to challenge inherited assumptions is essential for genuine progress. Dumbledore paused, his blue eyes twinkling as he looked out at an audience that included students from all houses sitting together, alumni who had returned to witness the transformation, international observers taking notes for implementation at their own institutions, and faculty members who had experienced firsthand the benefits of collaborative approaches to education. But most importantly, the headmaster continued, they have created a model of friendship, courage, and commitment to justice that will inspire students for decades to come. The friendship between Harry Potter and Hermione Granger that began this transformation will be remembered not just as a personal relationship, but as an example of how individual choices to choose love over prejudice can change entire communities. Future students will learn that some friendships are worth fighting the whole world for, that principles matter more than convenience, and that the magic of working together is more powerful than any spell designed to keep us apart. As the celebration concluded, and students began dispersing to continue the collaborative projects and cross-house relationships that had become the new normal at Hogwarts, Harry found himself walking with Hermione through corridors that no longer felt divided by artificial boundaries. "Did you ever imagine it would grow into this?" Hermione asked, gesturing toward the mixed groups of students from all houses who were naturally organizing themselves for evening study sessions and social activities. Harry considered the question, thinking about their journey from that first moment when Hermione had walked to the Slytherin table with her chin held high, determined to prove that blood status meant nothing and that she belonged wherever she chose to make her stand. "I imagined we would defend our friendship," Harry said honestly. "I never imagined we would end up transforming an entire educational system and creating a model that would influence magical schools throughout the world." "The best transformations," Hermione replied, with the wisdom that had always characterized her approach to complex problems, "usually begin with people who are simply trying to do the right thing in their immediate circumstances. We weren't trying to revolutionize education. We were just trying to maintain a friendship that mattered to us. And it grew," Harry said, understanding flooding through him as he grasped the larger lesson their experience represented. "It grew because friendship and cooperation and the courage to stand up for what's right are naturally more powerful than prejudice and division and the fear that keeps people apart," Hermione agreed. "We didn't create something new. We just removed the barriers that were preventing something beautiful from flourishing." As they reached the integrated wing where students from all houses were settling in for an evening of collaborative study and genuine community, Harry realized that they had created something that would outlast their time at Hogwarts and continue growing long after they graduated. The Founder's vision was no longer just restored. It was evolving, becoming something even more beautiful than its creators had imagined, renewed and strengthened by each new student who chose cooperation over competition, friendship over prejudice, and love over hate. The traditions they had established would ensure that future generations of Hogwarts students would learn that the magic of working together was the most powerful force in their world, capable of transforming not just individual lives, but entire communities, and, ultimately, the magical society itself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to apply the collaborative principles they had proven effective, and new students who would need examples of what could be accomplished when people chose courage over comfort and unity over division. But tonight, Harry was content to sit surrounded by friends from all houses, working together toward common goals, living proof that some friendships really were worth fighting the whole world for, and that the courage to choose love over hatred could indeed change everything. The revolution was complete, but the work of building something better would continue for generations to come, and the traditions they had established would ensure that it would. Chapter 12. Legacy of Unity. 5 years had passed since the first Founders' Unity Day, and the Great Hall of Hogwarts looked remarkably different on this warm September morning. Where house tables had once created rigid divisions between students, now flexible seating arrangements allowed natural mixing based on friendship, shared interests, and collaborative projects rather than arbitrary dormitory assignments. Professor Harry Potter stood at the front of his Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, watching 7th-year students from all 4 houses work together on advanced protective magic that would have been impossible under the old system. Their collaborative approach to spell work had produced innovations that were already being studied by magical defense experts throughout Europe. "Remember," Harry said, his voice carrying the easy authority that had developed during his years of teaching, "the most powerful protective magic comes not from individual strength, but from the connections we build with others. A shield charm cast by someone fighting alone will always be weaker than one supported by friends who understand your vulnerabilities and strengths." He paused to observe a mixed-house team working on a particularly complex ward that required Gryffindor courage, Ravenclaw precision, Slytherin cunning, and Hufflepuff patience to implement successfully. The students moved together with the kind of seamless cooperation that had once seemed impossible, but was now simply the normal way Hogwarts students learned magic. "Professor Potter," one of the Ravenclaw students asked, "is it true that you and Professor Granger were the first students to prove that collaborative magic was more effective than house-based competition?" Harry smiled, still amazed after all these years by how quickly their personal story had become part of Hogwarts legend. First-year students now learned about the Great Integration as a foundational part of the school's history, alongside the founding of the houses and the defeat of Voldemort. Professor Granger and I were among the first to systematically document the benefits of inter-house cooperation, Harry replied diplomatically. But the real credit belongs to all the students who were brave enough to challenge inherited prejudices and build something better, despite facing significant pressure to maintain traditional divisions. The answer was true but modest, reflecting the perspective Harry had developed as he watched their movement grow from personal friendship defense to global educational transformation. Their individual contributions had been important, but the lasting change had come from hundreds of students who chose cooperation over competition, friendship over prejudice, and love over hatred. As the class period concluded and students filed out discussing their collaborative projects with obvious enthusiasm, Harry found himself thinking about the broader changes that had transformed not just Hogwarts, but magical education throughout the world. The integration model they had developed was now being implemented at magical schools across Europe, North America, and beyond. The International Confederation of Magical Education had officially endorsed collaborative learning approaches as best practice for preparing students for careers in an increasingly interconnected magical world. More remarkably, many of their former opponents had become advocates for integration after witnessing its practical benefits for their own children's education. Harry's reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Deputy Headmistress Hermione Granger, whose promotion to the position had been both unprecedented for someone so young and entirely inevitable, given her contributions to educational innovation and international recognition as an expert in collaborative learning theory. "How did the 7th years do with the advanced ward work?" Hermione asked, settling into the chair across from Harry's desk with the easy familiarity of someone who had shared countless similar conversations over the years. "Brilliantly," Harry replied. "They're achieving levels of magical cooperation that would have been considered impossible when we were students. The team from your advanced magical theory class managed to create a ward matrix that incorporates all 4 house magical traditions simultaneously." Hermione's expression lit up with the academic excitement that had always characterized her response to genuine innovation. "That's remarkable. The theoretical implications for collaborative magic research are extraordinary. Have you documented their methodology?" "Of course," Harry said with a smile. "I thought you might want to include it in your presentation to the international conference next month." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the classroom door, followed by the appearance of Professor Luna Lovegood, whose appointment to teach magical creatures and interdisciplinary studies had been one of Dumbledore's most inspired decisions. "Harry, Hermione," Luna said, with her characteristic serene directness, "I wanted to remind you about this afternoon's ceremony. The monument dedication is scheduled for 3 o'clock, and I believe several of the original integration supporters will be attending." Harry felt a familiar mixture of pride and humility as he thought about the monument that would be unveiled that afternoon. The idea had come from current students who wanted to honor the first integrators, who had challenged the house system and created the collaborative educational environment they now took for granted. "Has the artist finished the inscription?" Hermione asked. "Yes," Luna replied with a smile that suggested she found the final result particularly satisfying. It reads, "In honor of the students who proved that some friendships are worth fighting the whole world for, and that the courage to choose unity over division can change everything." The simple words captured both their personal journey and the larger transformation it had catalyzed, and Harry found himself moved by how accurately they reflected what had mattered most during those challenging months of building integration programs against institutional resistance. "Professor McGonagall asked me to let you know that several special guests will be attending," Luna continued, "including some people whose perspectives on integration have evolved considerably since your student years." The diplomatic phrasing made Harry curious about which former opponents had requested to attend the ceremony, but before he could ask for details, Luna had drifted away with her characteristic ethereal grace. The afternoon ceremony took place in the courtyard, where they had once held secret integration meetings, now transformed into a formal memorial garden that honored not just their specific contributions, but the ongoing work of building bridges across traditional divisions. Harry stood with Hermione and other former integration leaders as Professor McGonagall, now headmistress, prepared to unveil the monument. The assembled crowd included current students, faculty, international educational observers, and a surprising number of alumni who had traveled considerable distances to participate in the dedication. Today, we honor students who demonstrated that individual courage, applied consistently over time, can transform entire institutions, McGonagall said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and their fellow integration pioneers proved that friendship across traditional boundaries was not just possible but powerful enough to reshape educational practice throughout the magical world. As the covering was removed from the monument, Harry saw a beautiful sculpture depicting students from all 4 houses working together, their hands joined in collaborative magic that created something more beautiful than any individual contribution. The artistry captured both the practical cooperation they had built and the deeper unity it represented. But more than their institutional achievements, McGonagall continued, these students demonstrated that the most important magic is the magic of human connection, the courage to choose love over prejudice, cooperation over competition, unity over division. The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, coming from people who had witnessed firsthand the benefits of the changes these early integration advocates had fought to establish. As the formal ceremony concluded and guests began mingling in smaller groups, Harry found himself in conversation with several unexpected attendees whose presence reflected how dramatically attitudes had shifted over the past 5 years. "Professor Potter," said a familiar voice behind him. Harry turned to find Lucius Malfoy, whose appearance had changed considerably since their last encounter. The cold arrogance had been replaced by something that looked remarkably like humility, and his greeting carried none of the contempt that had characterized their previous interactions. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry replied, uncertain how to interpret this development. "I wanted to thank you," Lucius said without preamble, "for the educational opportunities you created for students like my son." Draco's transformation during his final years at Hogwarts prepared him for leadership roles that would have been impossible under the traditional system. Harry studied Lucius's expression, seeing what appeared to be genuine gratitude rather than political calculation. "Draco changed himself," Harry said carefully. "The integration programs just gave him space to grow into the person he chose to become." "Perhaps," Lucius agreed, "but that space would not have existed without students willing to challenge systems that people like myself had worked to maintain. Your courage in defending cross-house friendship created possibilities for growth that benefited my family in ways I was too prejudiced to recognize at the time." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Draco himself, accompanied by a woman Harry didn't immediately recognize, but whose presence seemed to bring obvious happiness to Draco's expression. "Potter," Draco said with warmth that would have been unthinkable during their school years. "I don't believe you've met my fiancée, Astoria Greengrass." "Daphne's younger sister," Harry said, understanding dawning as he recognized family resemblance to one of their early integration supporters. "Congratulations to both of you." "The wedding is next month," Astoria said with obvious excitement. "We're planning the first fully integrated magical ceremony in our family's histories, guests from all houses, traditions from multiple magical cultures, celebration focused on unity rather than family status or blood purity. Luna Lovegood is designing the decorations," Draco added with a slight smile. "She's convinced that incorporating all 4 house colors will create magical resonances that enhance the binding ceremony." I suspect she's probably right. As Harry listened to Draco discuss wedding plans that would have been scandalous 5 years earlier, and were now simply an extension of the collaborative principles that had become normal at Hogwarts, he realized how completely their movement had transformed not just educational practice, but broader magical society. The conversation continued with other alumni sharing stories of how integration principles had influenced their careers, relationships, and approach to challenges that required collaborative solutions. International magical cooperation had improved dramatically as graduates trained in collaborative approaches brought those skills to diplomatic, research, and commercial endeavors throughout the magical world. The employment advantages are remarkable, one former Ravenclaw told a group of current students. Magical employers now specifically seek graduates with integration training because they know these candidates can work effectively across cultural and disciplinary boundaries. My magical research team includes graduates from 7 different magical schools, a former Hufflepuff added. But the Hogwarts integration alumni consistently demonstrate superior collaborative skills and creative problem-solving abilities. As the afternoon progressed, Harry found himself in conversation with Hermione about the broader implications of everything they had observed during the ceremony. "Do you think we accomplished what we set out to do?" Hermione asked, as they walked through gardens that had been planted by students from all houses working together on beautification projects. Harry considered the question seriously, thinking about their original goal of defending their friendship across house lines, and how that simple objective had evolved into something much larger. "I think we accomplished something more important than what we originally intended," he said finally. "We wanted to maintain our friendship, despite institutional pressure to abandon it. Instead, we created an educational model that has improved the lives of thousands of students and transformed magical society's approach to cooperation and collaboration." "The ripple effects keep expanding," Hermione agreed. "Students trained in integration approaches are now becoming teachers, policymakers, researchers, and leaders throughout the magical world. The principles we fought to establish are becoming foundational assumptions for an entire generation." They paused beside a fountain that had been installed as a gift from international magical schools that had implemented their own integration programs. The fountain's design incorporated magical elements from dozens of different cultural traditions, creating something beautiful that could only have existed through collaborative effort. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," Hermione said, her voice carrying the kind of excitement that typically preceded her most significant announcements. "The University of Edinburgh has offered me the position of Chair of Magical Educational Innovation. It would involve developing integration programs for magical universities throughout Britain and consulting on implementations across Europe." Harry felt pride, and something that might have been loss warring in his chest as he processed what Hermione was telling him. The position represented extraordinary professional recognition and the opportunity to expand their work beyond secondary education to influence magical higher education and research training. "That's incredible," he said, meaning it completely, despite his personal reservations about losing her daily collaboration at Hogwarts. "You'd be perfect for that role. Your research and practical experience with integration make you the obvious choice." "I haven't accepted yet," Hermione said quietly. "I wanted to discuss it with you first." Harry studied her expression, seeing the internal conflict between professional opportunity and personal attachment that he recognized from his own career decisions. "Hermione," he said seriously, "this is exactly the kind of opportunity that could transform magical education throughout Europe. You can't let personal considerations prevent you from taking a position where you could help thousands of students benefit from collaborative learning approaches." "Personal considerations matter too," Hermione replied. "The partnership we've built at Hogwarts has been the foundation for everything we've accomplished. I'm not sure I want to give up something that's been so meaningful and effective." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Professor McGonagall, whose expression suggested she had news that would resolve at least part of their dilemma. "Harry, Hermione," McGonagall said, with the kind of pleased satisfaction that characterized her announcements of particularly positive developments. "I've just received confirmation from the International Confederation of Magical Education. They've approved funding for the Hogwarts International Integration Institute, with Harry as director and Hermione as chief research officer." Harry stared at McGonagall, trying to process the implications of what she was describing. An institute? He asked. A permanent research and training centre based at Hogwarts, but serving magical schools throughout the world, McGonagall explained. You would develop integration curricula, train teachers in collaborative approaches, and conduct research on educational innovation. Essentially, you would be doing exactly what you're already doing, but with resources to expand your impact globally. The position would allow Hermione to accept the University of Edinburgh appointment while maintaining her research base at Hogwarts, McGonagall continued. Joint appointments that maximize both opportunities for professional growth and institutional collaboration. Harry felt excitement building as he grasped the scope of what McGonagall was describing. Instead of choosing between personal partnership and professional opportunity, they would be able to expand their collaboration while taking on leadership roles in magical educational transformation throughout Europe. When would this begin? Hermione asked, her academic mind immediately moving toward practical implementation questions. Next academic year, McGonagall replied, which gives you time to complete current commitments while developing plans for the Institute's inaugural programs. As McGonagall departed to attend to other ceremony responsibilities, Harry and Hermione found themselves alone with the realization that their work together was entering a new phase rather than ending. A Global Integration Institute, Hermione said, her voice filled with the wonder that characterized her response to genuinely transformative possibilities. Based on friendship, Harry added. Based on proving that cooperation works better than competition, that diversity strengthens rather than weakens communities, that the courage to build bridges can change entire societies. The evening concluded with a gathering in the Great Hall that brought together current students, faculty, alumni, and international guests for a celebration that exemplified everything integration had come to represent. Students from all houses mingled naturally, conversations crossed traditional boundaries, and the atmosphere reflected genuine community rather than artificial division. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during the informal speeches that followed dinner, when Professor Dumbledore rose to address the assembled crowd. 5 years ago, the headmaster said, his voice carrying the warmth that had always characterized his best moments. 2 students chose friendship over convenience, principle over prejudice, love over hatred. Their choice seemed small at the time, simply the decision to maintain a relationship that institutional pressure encouraged them to abandon. But as we have learned, small choices made with consistent courage can transform entire worlds. Harry Potter and Hermione Granger's friendship became the foundation for educational innovations that have improved the lives of thousands of students and will continue to benefit generations yet to come. Dumbledore paused, his blue eyes twinkling, as he looked out at an audience that included many of the people whose lives had been directly touched by the changes that friendship had catalyzed. They proved that some friendships are indeed worth fighting the whole world for, because such friendships change the world itself. The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, but Harry found himself thinking less about recognition and more about the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. As the celebration wound down and guests began departing, Harry found himself walking through corridors filled with students whose natural integration across house lines would have seemed miraculous just a few years earlier. Their easy collaboration and genuine friendships represented the new normal at Hogwarts, the foundation upon which future educational innovations would be built. The final moment of the day came in the integrated common room, where Harry and Hermione sat surrounded by students from all houses working together on projects that would have been impossible under the traditional system. "Do you remember?" Hermione asked quietly. "What you said to me on the night I was sorted into Slytherin?" Harry thought back to that evening, that now seemed both distant and immediate, when everything they had built together had begun with a simple gesture of loyalty. "I said we'd face whatever came next together," he replied, "because that's what real friends do." "And we did," Hermione said with satisfaction. "We faced institutional pressure, political opposition, family disapproval, anonymous threats, and systematic attempts to destroy everything we were trying to build, and we not only survived, we thrived. Because we had each other, Harry said, understanding the essential truth that had sustained them through every challenge. Because friendship really is stronger than any force designed to divide us. The Sorting Hat didn't make a mistake when it placed me in Slytherin, Hermione said, her voice carrying the wisdom that had developed through years of proving that unconventional choices could produce extraordinary results. It showed us possibility, the possibility that someone could succeed in any environment, that prejudice could be overcome through excellence, that bridges could be built across any divide. Harry nodded, thinking about how completely their understanding had evolved from that first night when Hermione's sorting had seemed like a crisis to be overcome, rather than an opportunity to be embraced. And now that possibility is available to every student who comes to Hogwarts, he said. Every young person who needs to see that they can succeed, regardless of other people's expectations, that friendship can transcend any artificial boundary, that the courage to be yourself can change everything. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching students from all houses collaborate on projects that would advance their shared goals and strengthen their friendships, Harry realized that they had created something that would outlast their individual contributions and continue growing long after they moved on to other challenges. The integration model would continue evolving, adapted by future students to address problems they hadn't yet imagined. The collaborative principles would spread to other institutions, other communities, other aspects of magical society. The example of friendship that chose principle over convenience would inspire other people to make similar choices when faced with pressure to abandon their values. But perhaps most importantly, they had proven that individual choices to choose love over hatred really could transform entire worlds, one relationship at a time, one act of courage at a time, one moment of choosing unity over division at a time. Some friendships are worth fighting the whole world for, Harry said quietly, echoing Dumbledore's earlier words, but making them personal, making them theirs. Because sometimes, Hermione replied with the smile that had sustained them through every challenge and would continue to inspire everyone who heard their story, fighting for friendship means fighting for the world itself. As midnight approached, and the common room gradually emptied, Harry and Hermione remained together, surrounded by the legacy they had built and anticipating the future they would continue creating. Their work was far from over. There would always be new challenges, new opportunities to prove that cooperation was stronger than competition, new young people who needed examples of what could be accomplished when someone chose courage over comfort. But tonight, they were content to sit in the integrated common room they had helped design, watching the embers of the fireplace that warmed students from all houses, knowing that some friendships really were worth fighting the whole world for, and that the courage to choose unity over division had indeed changed everything. The revolution was complete, but the work of building something better would continue forever. And that was exactly as it should be. The end.